Today's episode is sponsored by June's Journey. Find your first clue by downloading June's Journey today. Available on Android and iOS mobile devices, as well as on PC through Facebook Games. Today's episode is also brought to you by HelloFresh. Go to hellofresh.com/BeScared65 and use code BeScared65 for 65% off plus free shipping. I'll do my best to explain what I saw, but it's difficult to paint an exact picture. I was driving across the country with my mum. We just entered California from Arizona a little bit before 11 p.m. It was a rural area and there were other cars around, but definitely wouldn't call it traffic. I'm driving and a bit off-road on the right side, ground level-ish, I see something sort of glowing. It's a fluorescent neon dark blue, very bright, but it didn't light up anything around it. It wasn't just glowing though, it was sort of shaped like some kind of energy cell looking thing out of a futuristic movie or video game. Probably 5 feet tall and 2 feet wide with ribbed sides. I then realized that this thing was moving, and moving very weirdly. It was sort of moving like it was glued to the ground and tracing the slightly hilly terrain, like it was on top of some kind of off-road vehicle that was sort of magnetically held down to the terrain that it was driving on. After a few seconds, it got up a little and disappears into the ground, and we see these 2 small spotlights pointing in the air appear where it disappeared. They were moving very quickly though, like those ones you see when there's some kind of arena event in your city, but the light didn't reach super far. These spotlights were encased by some kind of, like light dome and couldn't shine past it. The light was just stopped in its tracks instead of fading out into the sky, and in the dome it was lit up. It looked like fog inside of it, but not exactly fog, but I could still see those 2 spotlights shining around in it sporadically because they were shining brighter than the rest of the dome. Keep in mind, I could not see anything else as it was really dark, but I couldn't see the ground or surroundings too. I drove past it speaking with my mum, just trying to figure out what the heck that was that we just saw. All of it looked extremely unnatural. But literally 5 seconds of driving later, my mum screams, "What the heck is that?" I never actually ended up seeing what she was talking about, but she described basically what the internet says are black stick men on the left side of the road now. It was the opposite side of the road that we saw the neon light dome thing, and about 5 seconds of doing 65 miles per hour of distance from the dome. She said that they were about 12 feet tall, built like stick figures or on stilts, and she couldn't discern ahead. I saw another story that described how they walked in the same way my mum did, sort of lolloping or had a kind of bounce waddle in their steps. At first there was only one walking, and then another appeared close to it, and they were going towards each other, apparently. I punched the gas though, and I just got out of there because, to heck with that, right? I didn't think quick enough to take a video of the light dome blue thing, but I'm sort of glad that I didn't because for some reason I feel like that wouldn't have gotten off easy for that. I'm really not sure why I can't shake the theory that this blue light has to do with the government or something going after these things, but I don't know. I'll also mention we then saw flashing things in the sky pretty far away, moving too close to each other to be aircraft, but I've written that off as probably just border patrol drones or something, as they were just too far away to make out. As for the rest of it, I really don't know what to make of it, but as I said, it all appeared completely unnatural. Four years ago, I trained a new worker who was honestly a nice guy at the time, early 30s, seemingly healthy, very much into yoga, and had a beautiful girlfriend, etc. He seemed very balanced and healthy, to be honest. For the sake of this narrative, I'll name him Coworker A. So we had another long-time coworker who was sort of Mr. Popular with managers, but honestly super annoying, a really large personality, People mutually could only take him in small doses. He was essentially the embodiment of a TikTok frat boy who would randomly dance on the job and freestyle, and extremely annoying. But anyway, I'll call him Coworker B. Now, before I explain, I should include that this workplace sucks. It barely holds a single star on Indeed. It's a large factory with no windows, toxic management, long hours, and it was very hard on most people's mental health. Anyway, roughly a year into Coworker A's stay, things started changing. He and I were mutually friendly to one another. We would have long civilized discussions about interesting things, but something was really out of place when he mentioned that his new beliefs about the world being flat and a hologram moon theory or something. It was really unlike the old version of him who was super rational, but I sort of shrugged it off and said it's probably just a phase or he's trolling or something. Fast forward a few weeks and Coworker A has seemingly took a lot of interest in Coworker B and sort of developed some of his mannerisms, but in a more endearing way, I guess. Kind of copying his silly dances and laughing. Seemed harmless at the time, but as months go past, he continued to dance more and more to the point that he had to be asked to stop by supervisors. He would even be moving around at the morning meetings, using all the same mannerisms and phrases as Coworker B. This really started to creep out Coworker B a bit, to the point that he actually switched shifts, and we theorized that maybe he was on drugs. But Coworker A was very vocal against all substance use, including alcohol and weed. He was also a vegan, so I don't know, that just didn't fit. Where things change for the worse, though, is when Coworker B ends up getting with a new hire at work. She ends up becoming his girlfriend, and they move in together. This is when Coworker A shows up to work using Coworker B's name, even signing himself in on the logbook as him, referring to himself as B all morning. Then, later that day, A stands up on a work table screaming, "I'm in love with Coworker B's girlfriend," by name, with his arms spread out in a cross like Jesus formation, face to the ceiling, and the whole place just went silent. And after he ended up standing in a corner with a broom sweeping nothing for the next several hours, he wouldn't turn around from the corner either, not even when tapped on the shoulder or called by name. The only time that I saw him away from that corner was when it was time to go home. He was the last one out, and unfortunately, my job being QC, I'm always among the last ones out as well. Despite both of us being the last in the building, I did my best to act normal when passing him in the hallway. I glanced at him. He was looking directly at me, head tilted down, making a sort of pseudo-snarling dog face, eyebrows in a V, tongue and teeth out. The next day, though, our boss decided Coworker A needed to go to the hospital, so we actually made an appointment and got him in with an Uber. He was put on leave for a week as well. The security guards who I was friends with told me that A was showing up in the middle of the night trying to sign in for work at the card reader, apparently, sometimes at 2 or 3 in the morning. Anyway, surprisingly, a week later, Coworker A comes back and seems somewhat normal, almost like he has no recollection of anything that he did. He even wrote an entire album on his phone apparently in that time, which surprisingly was better than I thought that it would be. But I noticed that it was all like love lyrics, sort of like country love songs. As things seemed to normalize with Coworker A, he stated that he really wanted to hang out with me, go for a hike and throw axes at trees, etc. I sort of didn't agree or disagree and told him that I'd get back to him on that, as I secretly was a little on edge. He asked me later that day if I was still down, and I said unfortunately I had other obligations. He said, "Well, I guess I can't throw an axe at your face then." And I sort of laughed, not really knowing how to react to that at all. I told the manager about that though, and he kind of just scratched his head uncomfortably and shrugged his shoulders. Anyway, Coworker A ends up finding Coworker B's address due to a work get-together where everyone was invited and someone leaked it to Coworker A. They eventually find rocks and bricks in weird formations on their doorstep, like shrines almost, and we all collectively knew that it was definitely A. Things got really weird though when they actually found A looking through their windows at night. He was also scratching the windows with his nails, calling out B's name, repeatedly whispering, "B, I need to tell you something." This is when our manager finally decided to take action and agreed to fire A. And 4 years later, coworker A still stalks coworker B's now ex-girlfriend, who had to get a restraining order against him. He annually makes new Facebook accounts and adds all 200 plus workers who used to work there as the place got shut down. He uses a new name each time with a different selfie. He sends a message to each one of us as well saying, "Hey, you, it's B from work." So, I guess my question is, what would this behavior be called? And how did such a normal, likable, level-headed person turn into this? Is there a term for this behavior? What would your diagnosis be, and how do I keep myself and other people safe? One of my friends had the balls to actually ask him in a reply if he recalls anything, which apparently he doesn't. But he sure remembers B's ex-girlfriend, and says some extremely concerning things about how she's the one and the only one. I'm the bigger one and she's the smaller one. He was put on this earth essentially to save her, apparently. He also seemingly has no support at all from family or anything, and is working a new job and living alone unattended. I feel like this is sort of a risk, yeah? Anyway, I'm interested in some of your feedback about what he might be dealing with, and again, what do I do about this? So some folks don't stop searching until they find the truth. And if you've got the eye of a detective, June's Journey is the game for you. Play as the intrepid June Parker and follow her story to solve the death of her sister. You'll hunt for clues in hundreds of beautifully illustrated scenes to uncover new clues in this thrilling murder mystery set in the Roaring Twenties. I've actually really enjoyed playing this game in my spare time. It sort of reminds me of those old school finder books where you have to look for a bunch of different things or people. But the really interesting thing about this particular game is that you're doing this in the midst of a murder mystery, so you have to find clues that assist with solving a crime. I also really like some of the unique features, like the ability to build your own island estate with expansive gardens and beautiful buildings and whatnot. But I especially love the contest for short stories, which allows you to win prizes. I know some of you listeners are rather gifted writers, so for you guys, it's worth checking out for sure. All in all, it's a really fun game that has kept me coming back for more during my downtime on my phone when I'm between tasks and chores and have a spare minute or two. I'm on chapter 4 now, and at the moment I'm continuing with Claire and Harry Van Buren's homicide, and it's getting pretty juicy now too. It's free to download and is a great way to unwind if you enjoy puzzles like I do. So, find your first clue by downloading June's Journey today. Available on Android and iOS mobile devices, as well as on PC through Facebook Games. I grew up in a very small town of about 1,000 people. There really wasn't much to do, so my friends and I spent a lot of time walking in the spring and summer months. The town was small, but Route 2 runs right through it, and it's a highway that is the northernmost east-west major US highway, spanning 2,571 miles. It was and is a quiet town, but you definitely see some out-of-state cars passing through. And when I was about 13 or 14 years old, I was walking along Route 2 to go to my best friend's house. There was a wide spot off to the side of the road where I was, and a man on a blue motorcycle with a matching helmet pulled into it. I could only see his eyes through the helmet, but he seemed kind and had a nice, non-threatening sounding voice. He seemed young. If I had to guess, I would say that he was probably in his 20s or early 30s at the latest. I remember our conversation very well, even though I haven't given it much thought over the years. I remember him being very flattered and sort of naive, I guess, but when he pulled in, he asked me where the nearest bridge was, and I told him that there was one about 7 miles north in the next town over, or about 20 miles back from the direction that he came from. He thanked me, and proceeded to tell me how pretty I was, and asked to take me to lunch. I thanked him for the compliment and told him that I was going to a friend's house, but this went on for quite a long time. I would say every bit of 5 minutes, I would guess, but he kept telling me how great of a time that we would have, and that he didn't know his way around and could use my help picking a place to eat. I was trying to be nice, but kept reminding him that I was on my way to a friend's, and also saying things like he only had one helmet anyway, and he said that I could wear his for a short distance, and that he would bring me right back into town after we ate, and that it wouldn't be long at all. He only gave up when I pointed out my friend's bright blue house that was about maybe a block away, and that she and her family were expecting me any minute. This was kind of truthful, but a small lie too. She knew that I was coming that day, but I always told my friend that I would walk down after I woke up the next day when we had plans, and I never gave her a call to tell her when that would be. I always slept in late during the summer too, so she wouldn't have expected me. My friend's mum was always smoking on the porch though, but her back was facing my direction, so she didn't see the interaction, but I could see her. She would have absolutely been there fighting off this man in a heartbeat if he had actually tried forcing me onto his bike. All I would have had to have done was yell for her and she would have been there. I thought that I was invincible at the time, and so grown up, I thought that I was tough and that nobody would ever harm me. Like I said, I remember being very flattered, which is really stupid of me, I know, but I remember thinking how fun it sounded and that I would get to ride on a motorcycle for the first time. I actually considered getting on the stranger's bike at one point because I thought that I could take on anything and that it sounded sort of exciting. The only reason that I didn't go was because I knew how angry my parents would be if they found out. I now know that my parents wouldn't have been angry at all, to be honest, but relieved if I had actually gone and made it back. It's funny how you process things at a young age, but regardless, I'm just really happy that I didn't want to make them mad. It could have actually saved my life, I know that. Looking back, there was no way that he didn't think that I was a kid. I was still in my awkward stage and looked very much like my age at that time. But what freaks me out looking back is that he asked me to go to the nearest bridge and wanted me to go with him in that direction, and that he was just so persistent. He could have been out of state in 7 minutes too, and nobody would have even realized that I was gone until much later that day. I, a 30-year-old female, live with my wife and our sweet orange tabby cat. We own a home in an old neighborhood in a college town. The neighborhood is mostly families and older people. Right around 2 a.m, Monday morning, my wife and I are both woken up by our cat. Immediately after we hear him, we distinctly hear someone rattling our door. To make the sound, they would have had to have been holding the handle and trying to open it. We rush to the living room and my wife, wielding her aluminum bat, smacks our leather recliner and screams, "I have a bat." Our cat is crouched on the ground and growling, his hackles raised. I got 911 on the line and we all got into our bedroom with a lock while we wait for the police. They came by and they didn't see anything. That night though, my wife didn't get any more sleep and I only got a little myself after our cat curled up next to me. We both called out to our jobs at the university on Monday and wound up getting locked bars for the front and back doors, and replaced the back door lock with one that requires a key on both sides. This thankfully went as well as it could have, but was just so out of the blue and upsetting for us. I mean, it was just something that we never expected living where we live. More than anything, though, it's just a good reminder to stay vigilant and invest in that security measure when you can. We never imagined someone would try to break in during the dead of night when there are 2 cars in the driveway after all. But some people out there, they just don't care if somebody's at home or not. With HelloFresh, you get farm-fresh, pre-portioned ingredients and seasonal recipes delivered right to your doorstep. Skip trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make home cooking easy, fun, and affordable. That's why it's America's #1 meal kit. Looking for an easy way to eat well, save money, and enjoy a delicious meal while listening to scary stories? Well, cut back on expensive takeout and delivery and get started with HelloFresh. You'll love how fast, easy, and affordable it is to whip up a restaurant-quality meal right in your own kitchen. You can customize select meals by swapping proteins or sides, or even adding protein to a veggie dish. And now you can even upgrade for organic chicken or organic ground beef. Personally, I'm a bit of a sucker for a good burrito, and their Southwest pork and bean burrito is seriously delicious. I also found their ingredients to be really well packaged and the instructions easy to follow, and that is a win-win in my books. Quick, fresh meals that taste amazing, and I don't need to take that extra trip to the grocery store, saving me a ton of time with my busy schedule, has been a lifesaver for me. So, go to hellofresh.com/BeScared65 and use code BeScared65 for 65% off plus free shipping. That's hellofresh.com/BeScared65 and use code BeScared65 for 65% off plus free shipping. America's #1 meal kit. So, I'm in my early 30s now, and much of this happened between the ages of 10 and 14. All of it started shortly after my family and I moved into a new home in town. The house that we moved into was fairly new construction at the time, and I don't believe that there was anything interesting about the land that it was built on. But within a couple of months of moving in, I had my first experience with sleep paralysis. I'd gone to bed late at night, roughly 5 minutes after shutting the lights off and closing my eyes. I felt a cold presence touching my chest. I opened my eyes and saw nothing. Naturally, I was creeped out and ran into my parents' room for comfort. My mum convinced me that it was just a bad dream and that I should go back to bed, which I did. But immediately after closing my eyes again, I felt the same thing, except this time moving through the center of my chest with force. That feeling then expanded throughout my torso. Upon opening my eyes, I realized that I could not move or speak. At this point, I could feel something watching me directly to the right of my bed. I laid there for maybe 5 to 10 minutes trying to scream before regaining the ability to move, and as soon as I could, I jumped up and I ran back into my parents' room. Needless to say, I slept next to them that night. Lucky for me, though, I've only had to experience sleep paralysis a couple of times in my life, but there were several other odd encounters to follow, though. You see, a couple of months after that, at night, is when I had my next experience. My grandmother was watching my brother and me that evening, and she was on the first floor with my brother. I was on the second floor, and from my window looking down into my backyard, the house borders a small forest and river, I saw a bright white figure walking from one end to the other. It looked like a fully grown man, but glowing, and I never really saw a face. I was obviously a bit freaked out by the sight of this, so I ducked to ensure that whatever it was didn't see me. I briefly peeked out of the window a couple of seconds after, and whatever it was gone. I ran downstairs, though, immediately to find both my grandmother and my brother in the same room. No one that I know of was in the backyard at the time, so it definitely wasn't somebody in the house. Those experiences, though, piqued my interest in the paranormal, and roughly a few months after that, I convinced my mum to buy me a Ouija board. I then convinced our babysitter, who was a few years older than me, to use it with my brother while my parents were out of the house. We turned off all the lights and lit a couple of candles, and we tried to talk to the dead. At the time, I was definitely skeptical, and I assumed that it was our babysitter who was the one manipulating the planchette. But it was moving, and it was definitely responding to our questions. We eventually decided that we were done with it, and put the board away. Again, I just kind of laughed this one off, but I don't know. Thinking back on it, the frequency of these encounters went way up after this experience. The fact is that after that, I never really felt alone in this house, especially when I was the only one home. Fast forward to middle school, though, I was usually the first one home and would remain home alone for a couple of hours every day. I generally spent most of my time in the basement where the TV, video game console, and computer were. During this time, I would regularly hear kitchen cabinets slamming shut, but they weren't open to begin with, mind you, and dining room chairs being dragged across the floor. And I always felt as if there was something watching, like I said. I did at times wonder if some of this was just in my head, only for the thoughts to be validated by both my brother and a few friends that would come over at various intervals. But there was another standalone event around the same time where my brother and I were playing games in his room. We were both sitting on his bed, and to my right was the door to the hallway, which was wide open. The lights were off in the bedroom, and there was some tertiary lighting sort of coming from the hallway. Out of my peripheral view was, again, a fully formed person, a white figure that appeared to be walking past the doorway out in the hallway. And as I turned my head right, my brother to my left sneezed and blood came pouring out of his nose. Again, I saw just enough to be creeped out, but not enough to fully validate exactly what I saw. And the whole blood coming out of the nose thing was really random and weird. There were a few other events to follow, though, more or less the same as some of the stuff described above. But all of this came to a head one night, and this is also where I saw some of the most vivid stuff to date. I was 13 at the time, and my best friend was sleeping over. It was Friday night, and we were the only ones in the house at that point. We were on the second floor playing video games when all of a sudden we heard the cabinet doors slamming and the chairs moving. I was honestly used to it by now, but my friend got a bit freaked out and asked what it was. I'm paraphrasing, but I said something to the effect of, "It's those ghosts again, those ghosts." And this is when things got weird for us. Shortly after that, my TV just turned off. The room became very cold all of a sudden, and it was almost like the air became heavy. I don't know, it's hard to describe, but it took much more energy to get up and move around. We booked it from my room and went downstairs to the first floor. We calmed down afterwards and figured that we had just overreacted to what was probably just an odd coincidence. We then decided to go back upstairs to play video games. As we're walking up, it became very cold again, and we began to feel weighed down again. We ignored it this time, as again we just thought that it was all in our heads. We got to my room though and turned the TV on, along with the video games, and after about a minute or two, the same thing happened where the TV turned off. Only this time, I saw what looked like what I can only describe as a floating orb or two out of the corner of my eye, and at that, we again ran downstairs. Like an idiot, I tried going upstairs a third time. Same cold and heaviness as before. This time, as I approached the door of the stairs, I looked into my parents' room from the hallway. The door was open and the lights were off. And to the right of their bed, I saw an all-white figure standing with no torso or head. I again booked it downstairs, and at this point, we went into full-on paranoia mode. I tried calling my parents, but there was no answer. We were stuck at home feeling terrorized and not sure when the adults were coming back. At some point, we actually started chanting or praying out of desperation, which I actually think made things worse because the air on the first floor became extremely heavy, and we felt the cold rush down the stairs towards us. I also started to see the same small orbs fly into the room from upstairs, only this time directly in my field of view. This brought my anxiety to the next level, and I finally yelled out and apologized for saying what I had said earlier. And in a very candid way, I pleaded with whatever this thing was to leave me alone, pointing out that we both live here, and that I wouldn't mess with them going forward if they just didn't mess with me. As I was apologizing, I saw 2 or 3 more of those small orb things, and one much larger, a dark one, or purple or black sort of, all come into the room and just hang there for more than a few seconds. What's odd, though, is after my apology, the orbs just sort of dissipated and the air sort of cleared up a bit. My friend and I just sort of stood there looking at each other, absolutely dumbfounded of what we had just seen. Coincidentally, though, my mum came home maybe 20 minutes after the whole thing ended, and everything just went back to normal as if nothing had happened. Weirdly enough, too, I haven't seen anything since then. The noises that we regularly heard on the first floor continued, although they didn't bother me much at that point. I do think my friend may have been a bit traumatized from that experience, though, because He claimed that he felt as if he was being watched for a good while after that night too. In any case, I'd be interested to hear some of your thoughts. Some of this stuff was downright terrifying in the moment, and I would love to understand what the heck I was dealing with. Something really weird happened today. I got home and found that there were deep scratches on my bedroom TV, and before I left this morning it was fine. But that's not the weirdest thing. The night before, my girlfriend and I were home and we ate pizza, and we're 100% sure that there were 3 pieces left in her box that she couldn't eat. In the morning, she got up and left before me, and when I woke up I looked to see if she had finished them, and found that she still had 3 pieces. However, when I came home this afternoon, there were only 2 pieces in the box, and she confirmed to me that she had not eaten and that there were definitely 3 pieces. A similar food incident happened to me last week when I returned from holiday. Just before we left, I left half a sausage and a box of fries in the fridge, and when I came back, they were gone. I thought that I must have thrown them away before or something, or my aunt had dropped by and picked them up. Today my aunt confirmed that she hasn't been in town for over a month now and hasn't even been by. I also noticed a little later that the microwave settings had been changed too. I have other stories of missing items and lights being left on and things like that, but I always explained it away as me just losing it or something, and now I just don't know what to think. I don't know what to do either. The only people who have a house key are my aunt and my uncle and my dad. My uncle has absolutely no reason to come home, especially while I'm gone. My dad is on vacation, and like I said earlier, my aunt is out of town. But just the other day, something else happened that now I'm 100% sure that someone has access to my apartment. I saw a hole in the wall that was absolutely new, and also someone had opened, again, a completely new box of sweets. Also, there's another missing sweets like 1 chocolate and 2 bars of Kit Kats. In any case, I'm going to change the locks tomorrow and we'll sleep with a big knife by my side tonight too, while the front door is blocked. I lived in my childhood home from when I was a baby until 13. My family is very religious, and as a child, I was taught that when you die, you either go to heaven or hell, and that's it. I was never told about anything supernatural, so in a lot of these moments, I had no idea what I was experiencing. It wasn't until I was older that I guess I understood. Also, because I was so young for some of these, or I didn't understand in the moment, I only remember some details. But the last story is probably the scariest, and I honestly tear up sometimes when I talk about it. So, I want to do this chronologically, but I honestly can't remember which of these happened first, so I'll kind of combine them because they involve the same, well, entity, if that's what you want to call it. In elementary school, I walked home from school every day since it was only about a 15-minute walk. The house next door to us was abandoned for quite a few years after the last neighbors moved out, and I walked past it every day. Pretty frequently, I would see this girl in the top floor window, and she looked to be around the same age as me, maybe a little bit older. Curly, dirty blonde hair, pink bow in her hair, wearing a pink and white frilly dress. I never really thought much about her and just went home. But there was one time, though, that made me really confused. I was with my sister in her room playing with Barbies. She had a shuttered window in her room that faced the backyard. We were playing, and I'm really not sure why, but I just had the strangest feeling that I needed to open the window, so I did. And the girl was in our backyard, standing in front of the slide. I wasn't scared and was just sort of staring at her. She continued to stand there, and I'm not sure how long we were looking at each other, but she eventually began to just fade away. The best way that I can describe it is like when you stare at a light bulb and you look away for a moment and you can still sort of see the outline. It was kind of like that until she was just gone. It sounds stupid now, I know, because if I saw that now, I would freak out, obviously, but after she was gone, I just kept playing with my sister like nothing had happened. I would see this girl pretty often, too, but she never scared me. This one is short, but it was the middle of the night and I was asleep. I was maybe 5 or 6, I guess, when I was suddenly woken up to a hard punch to the stomach. After recovering and calming down a bit, I went to my parents' room and they told me that it was nerves, so I just believed them. But I absolutely hated my parents' room. The feeling and the energy in there was so heavy and dark. The feeling of panic would wash over me every time that I was in there. On multiple occasions, I would see things in there when walking to and from my room as well. The scariest entity I ever saw, though, was standing to the right of their bed. It had skin that just looked like tar or something, and it was taller than the ceiling, so it had to bend to fit into the room. I don't remember that it had a face or anything. I eventually stopped looking in their room entirely because of this. I hated when my parents would ask me to grab something for them in that room too, and I would sprint out every time. One time, though, I had walked home from school and it was really hot that day, so when I got home, I threw my hair up into a ponytail to cool off a bit. I walked into my room and I immediately felt fingers grip my ponytail and start pulling me back to my parents' room. Context too, all of our bedrooms were in the same hallway and mine was directly across from my parents' room. My dad and I roughhoused a lot and my parents knew that I was terrified of their room, so I honestly thought that it was him. It didn't hurt, and like I said, I just thought it was my dad messing around with me. He's a big guy, so I went to elbow him in the stomach, but I hit nothing. Confused, I quickly whipped around and saw no feet behind me. Just as the panic started to set in too, whatever it was, it dropped me right in front of my parents' door, and I whipped my head around to see what it was, but there was nothing. I sat in shock for a few moments before the tears started to fall. I eventually got up and found my dad talking to my grandma in the living room, and I just didn't know what to say or do. The next one, though, happened about a week before we moved out. It was only me and my grandma home. My mum took my sister to practice and my dad was out grabbing dinner. I was in the living room doing my homework, I think, on the couch. My grandma was watching TV in her room, which was to the left of me. The kitchen dining room and the hallway with all of our bedrooms was to the right of me. The hallway is out of sight from the living room since it goes behind the dining room. I was focused on my homework when I started to hear footsteps. They were going up and down the hallway and into the bedrooms, it seemed. I thought that it was my sister wearing her Disney princess costume heels at first. The footsteps kept going for a while, and then I realized that my sister wasn't actually home. It was just me and my grandma, and she was on the opposite side of the house. My cat was also by my feet, and my heart sank when I realized what it was, but I just decided to ignore it and not give it any attention. It eventually stopped, so I felt more relaxed, but after a few minutes of quiet, I heard the loudest slam that I had ever heard coming from a few feet away in the dining room. It sounded like someone picked up a boulder and just slammed it on the hard wood. I was looking on the ground for what might have fallen when I heard it speak. It sounded like multiple voices hissing and groaning my name all at once. It was honestly the most terrifying thing that I have ever experienced, and I currently have full-body chills just remembering what it sounded like. I just sat there frozen in silence with tears rolling down my face. I was too terrified to move or make a sound, and I finally managed to squeak out a little grandma, and nothing happened, so I started to sob, calling for her. She eventually arrived, but after that, it just went away or whatever. We actually moved out later that week, and the first night at the new house, I had a dream. I was standing in the street outside the old house at night. It was quiet and all the lights were off, when all of a sudden, all of the windows opened and it was so bright inside. It looked like a lighthouse, in fact. It sounded like a party was happening. multiple conversations going on, and you can see shapes of people moving around the house, sort of manipulating the light, and just as quickly as it started, it stopped. The windows, they all slammed shut, everything was quiet and dark again, and then I woke up. Now, I haven't experienced anything close to this since moving, but a few years ago, the current owners of the house invited my family over for a Super Bowl party. We continue to know them. We knew the people living there. I decided not to go, but my sister did. She talked to the owners and asked them if they had had any experiences of anything weird since moving in. They were shocked that she asked, and apparently they were seeing shadow people in and around the house looking in the windows, which obviously was not very reassuring for me. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed hearing about all this. Sorry it's a bit all over the place. It's hard to summarize 13 years of stuff like this, but these are some of the more scary things that I can recall. If anything doesn't make sense and you want more clarification or have any questions, then do let me know and I'll do my best to answer in the comments below. This past weekend, my parents had an experience. I didn't make much of it, and neither did the rest of the family, but I'm going to use general terms to protect some privacy. This parent got up in the morning for work. However, they were washing some dishes from the night before. I woke up and was able to hear them washing the dishes and everything. Nobody else was in the home or awake besides one of our pets. My parent came into the room and asked for my sibling. I mentioned that they were sleeping upstairs. We have a single room upstairs, somewhat like an attic but used as a bedroom, with my other sibling. At this point, my parent told me to swear that my sibling was upstairs. I explained that yes, they were, and I hadn't seen them come downstairs. They then said that she had seen my sibling run around the house and could feel the feet and items move as they ran. They were so sure that they walked over to peek around the couch to scare them, play hide and seek or whatever, and we didn't discuss it more, but more recently, I have also seen the same sibling at home, despite everyone being away. This sibling is still in grade school, so they wake up and get taken to school by one of my parents. I was also getting ready to leave for work, and as I was heading out of the bathroom, our cat ran and hid behind the bed. He is still a kitten, so he's very playful. The hiding is not suspicious to me, as he's been running around and playing by himself throughout the morning anyway. But I was leaving the bathroom and walked heading towards the bed to play with the cat. My bedroom door is in front of the door that leads to the dining room or common area. When out of the corner of my eye, I see this sibling sitting on the dining table, eating breakfast with only hair covering her face. I've made out the clothes that they were wearing, and as I went to play with the cat, it occurred to me to tell this sibling to stop playing with the cat and hurry up or else they'll be late for school. And as I walked out of my bedroom, I remembered my parents had already left with them, which means that I should have been the only one in the house. I quickly went out there, but when I did, there was nobody there. These experiences haven't felt malicious, I guess. The only common denominator between the two times this occurred is that the cat seems to be playing with them, which is really weird, just like he does with my sibling. That says to me that I'm not going crazy either, because when I came out, that little cat, it was acting as if something was there. I was reminded recently of this really scary incident involving a manager at one of the old jobs that I had. This happened about 5 years ago when I was 20. I believe he was around 42 or so, give or take a few years, plus or minus. But to paint you a picture here, the manager in question, his name was Tim, was a short sort of Viking-esque guy. Red beard, red hair, bright blue eyes, stocky build, not muscular though. Tim was also a heavy smoker and a known racist as well. He dropped the N-word at least 4 times a week for shock factor during conversations. He also used to refer to indigenous people as Indians. He stopped once he found out my ethnicity and confronted him about it. He was mostly bark with little bite, I guess, but still someone I was cautious around nonetheless. He also had a girlfriend who was also 20 at the time. She was like an alternate reality version of me. Like me, she was a bigger girl, size 24, 26-ish, piercings, tattoos, the works. I looked like the replicant tall version of her, I guess. It was pretty surreal, but he never outright told me that he had feelings for me, but on several occasions, he'd comment on how much I reminded him of his girlfriend, and would ask if I was into women in 3 ways. I was bisexual. He didn't know that, though. I gave vague answers every time that he asked me something of the sort, but one day he made an off comment about bisexual women being greedy, to which I reacted negatively, and I guess that he must have put the pieces together from there. Anyway, a couple of weeks went by of him asking me questions about my interests, my hobbies, what I do in my off time, my favorite music, etc. Normally I'd just chalk this up to office banter, but with the creepy undertones, I had a hard time engaging him about my personal life. At this time, I had also started seeing my now partner of 5 years. When my boss asked again what I was doing after work, I informed him that I was going to see my boyfriend. This sent him into a question tailspin, mind you. He asked how we met, how long we'd been dating, where he lived even. It was a bit unnerving, to be honest. But once again, I kept the answers vague. This time, though, I went on and on about how much I loved my partner and how excited I was to have such an amazing partner in my life. I wanted to be crystal clear that I was not interested in my boss. That same evening, as we were closing, he told me about his favorite music. He specifically mentioned a band called Immortal Technique, and a song of theirs called Dance with the Devil. I shrugged as I really wasn't familiar with the song, so he put it on the store speakers while he swept and I closed the cash register. For those of you who aren't familiar with that song, it's a very graphic and disturbing song that has a rather intense twist at the end. If you like the song, well, that's your taste, whatever, but personally, as a woman, I find it difficult listening to graphic depictions of extreme violence like that against women, period. But before continuing, I'd suggest that you read some of the lyrics if you can stomach them, specifically the last half as it pertains to this story. But anyway, Tim turns up the music to an almost deafening level while I count out the cash and get our computers closed up. As he's sweeping, he's actively and loudly rapping along word for word, dropping N-bombs, of course, all the way through. He hadn't been looking at me until the latter half of the song, where the lyrics began depicting a woman being sexually assaulted and killed by a group of men. It was visceral, violent, and terrifying. But Tim turns to me at this point of the song and stares into my eyes while pointing and dancing to the lyrics while still rapping along. He was making violent gestures while doing this in my direction. A motion of a head-stomping gesture with his hands thrusting. It was horrifying, but I quickly closed the cash register, quicker than I ever had in my life. I felt like I was in danger at that point, to be honest. So I grabbed my bag and jacket as the song finished. He turned it off and goes, "Isn't that something? It's poetry. The storytelling is just amazing, isn't it?" I remember my whole body was really tense and I muttered, "Not my cup of tea," and I just left. Now, I know that I should have given him my notice right then and there, but I was in a rough employment situation and couldn't up and just leave like that. After that, though, he actually stopped scheduling him and I together very often, and about a month later I gave my notice after finding a better job, full-time. He was furious when I left, of course. The company actually ended up closing that location a few months later because Tim apparently lost it, according to our common connection. It was a friend of mine, a worker of his. But this friend of mine also told me that he upped and moved to the other side of the country to be with his ex-wife, which was a bit of a yikes. But what made me remember this story was that a few months ago I was running errands in the outskirts of my city. I happened to stop by a random Taco Bell and guess who walks in with a very young-looking woman on his arm? It was Tim. I was with my partner, who also recognized him when they made eye contact. My partner and I were already seated and eating by this point. Tim looked at us, though, like a deer in the headlights, and booked it out of there faster than a kite on the wind. Before he left, though, I noticed that he had shaved his head and had gotten some suspicious-looking tattoos on his arms. And when he turned around, there was also a distinct White Power symbol patch on his jacket, and his girlfriend's jacket too. So not only was this guy a creep, but also a predator, and also now a white supremacist apparently. I don't go to that area anymore unless I'm accompanied by my partner at all times. Tim is also very much a part of my past, and I have no desire to run into him ever again. My husband and I live in a beautifully restored 100-year-old craftsman home in the oldest neighborhood of Houston, Texas. We've lived here for about 3 years, and in this time have experienced odd occurrences that we're unable to explain. Until today, we would joke that it must be a ghost, but never really believed it. But now, I don't know, I'm not so sure. I would like to get your opinion on these things. But is there a way that we can test for energies or anything in our house or something? I feel a bit silly asking that, but I would really genuinely like to know because I would like to get to the bottom of this. So first, about 2 months after moving into the house, I was in our upstairs guest room in our large, 7-foot-tall, heavy wood frame, maybe 75 pounds. A mirror, which was securely leaning on the wall, fell on top of me and pinned me against the bed. Thank goodness that my husband was home to help me get out from under it, because otherwise I would have been completely stuck. I wasn't hurt, but I definitely was really confused as I was just walking by, and in the past, when I've unleaned it, it took a lot of muscle to move it. On 2 occasions, with different guests, staying in the same guest room as where the mirror is, maybe 9-ish months apart from the previous story, they have told me while they were wide awake that they felt like someone sat on the bed, or like a cat jumped on the bed or something, only to realize that they were alone in the room. On another occasion, while I was outside gardening this past fall, I felt someone firmly push my back, which caused me to stumble. I was certain as I was turning around that there was going to be someone there, but when I did, I was completely alone. My husband thinks that I simply lost my balance, but I very clearly felt something touch my back. That I'm sure of. But there was nothing around. I couldn't have actually bumped into anything. It was clearly behind me too, but again, there was just absolutely nothing there. Like I was just in the middle of a field, basically, where there was nothing around me. And this brings us to today, which for me is the hardest one to ignore. So this morning, around 7 a.m., I heard 2 thuds about 10 minutes apart. After the second thud, I got up to let my dog out since they also woke him, and while he was outside, I investigated the sound. The cat was in our bedroom asleep with my husband, and there wasn't anybody else in the house. But I briefly looked around downstairs and didn't see anything, so I assumed it must have been something outside. I got my dog and went back to sleep, and fast forward to around 7 p.m., I went upstairs to get my stepson's, 10-month-old, bedroom ready for his arrival. His dad was picking him up. He's with us every other weekend. And I had found that 3 of his books had fallen off of his bookshelf. I believe that these were the series of thuds that I heard this morning, but there are some things that just make it extra peculiar. Like firstly, the books were a series of 4, and I had organized them in order when I placed them 2 weeks ago. Books 1, 2, and 4 had fallen, and the 3rd book remained perfectly intact and erect on the bookshelf. The second thing is that they fell in at least 2 series, minutes apart, not all at once. Thirdly, they fell pretty far out from the bookshelf. As a former physics major, I'm pretty certain it would have taken quite a bit of force to get them to land as far away as they did, and nothing had fallen behind where they were on the shelf that could have knocked them over like that. And lastly, for those who are curious, the bookshelf is securely attached to the wall and has many books and nail tacks and didn't appear to have been moved. The books also have an inch of clearance between them and the edge of the shelf, so I don't know, none of this makes any sense. This is strange, right? A few years ago, I had one of the most strangest experiences that I've ever had. So, I exited my train onto the station platform late at night and realized that the only other person there was a tall, thin man with a hood pulled over his head who stepped out of the train car behind me. I didn't like this. I didn't like the idea that he could sneak up on me, so rather than run ahead, because I knew that with my short corgi legs anyone could easily overtake me, I looked around the platform for places where I could brace myself against something if he tried to throw me onto the platform, like a trash can or a stairway. When I saw some benches ahead of me, I began to slow down, hoping that the best-case scenario that he would just walk past me was going to be the case, so that I'd no longer have a potential serial killer attacking me from behind. Or worst-case scenario, I would at least be emotionally prepared for whatever came next. He, unfortunately, slowed down as I slowed down, though, and when I realized that he was unlikely to walk past me, I just stopped suddenly and did the "oh no, did I lose my keys" pat down, thinking that I could force him to walk past me. He walked until he was directly next to me, turned, and just said, "Are you smart?" He didn't ask, he said. His delivery was sort of flat, I guess. No inflection. It sort of sounded a bit like a statement, not a question. His face was expressionless, and I thought of the Japanese slit-mouth ghost who would ask you if you thought that she was pretty, and if you said yes, she would kill you for lying, and if you said no, she'd kill you for being so rude. The only way to wriggle out of possible death was to give a confusing answer, and while she stood there racking her brain, you could make your escape. I stared back at him and said, "Huh?" I made my eyes as wide and as vacant as possible. He scoffed and repeated, "Are you smart?" I blinked and repeated, "What?" He got a little closer and said, "You look smart, so are you smart?" I shrugged with my palms up. I literally made the confused emoji pose and squeaked a noise that sounded like the Scooby-Doo whine or growl. He abruptly turned and walked angrily away. I stood for a while watching him, and to keep that same safe walking distance behind him, I did my pocket pat-down again, loudly slapping at my pant legs for a minute before I resumed walking slowly, and at a safe distance, too, behind him. I made sure to keep him in my field of vision while I walked the rest of the way down the platform, up the stairs, through the station, up the stairs to the street, finally tearing my eyes away when I saw that my bus had arrived. I basically ran across the street, leapt inside, scanned my fare card, found a seat, and I sat down. I looked out the window and, to my horror, he was walking alongside the bus. He slowed down as he got closer to where I was sitting, and when he was directly by my seat, he seemed to sort of pause for a bit but didn't look up, and continued walking. I was tense the entire ride home, and even when I reached my stop, I was sure that he was going to be waiting there. To this day, I'm honestly haunted by the thought of what he would have done if I'd answered yes or no to this question. It was just such a weird experience, and I just don't know what to think about it. So before talking about this, some backstory is that growing up, my parents never entertained the idea of paranormal activity or ghosts. They would always tell me to say my prayers whenever I felt uncomfortable, and that was it. But I've always been able to feel energy around me, and I'm a very intuitive person. Growing up Christian, I was never allowed anything to come in the way of that, and I myself never thought much of ghosts, supernatural beings, or anything. Deep down, though, I did know that there was truth in them, as there have been things that have happened to me as a child even that I just cannot explain. Until recently, however, when I had a whole crisis about my religion and I stopped going to church and stopped praying as much as I used to. Not that I don't believe in God, I just hated the brainwashing that used to happen at my church. I've started to rethink things. Anyway, at the start of the pandemic, I had a friend who was a very spiritual person, and still is, although she doesn't practice as much anymore. She would do tarot readings and give me details of my life and people around me if I asked her for it. And at the same time, I began to discover spirituality for myself. In fact, I was sort of obsessed with tarot readings on YouTube, although I never practiced myself. But this friend would give me more information, and I found myself becoming more interested in it. I would find myself becoming more interested in it, to the point where I started becoming more aware of my surroundings, and wondered to myself if those things that happened to me as a kid were things that I imagined, or if they actually happened. Regardless of those things, of note is the ongoing, inexplicable incidents that occur in my dorm room, and the constant nightmares and weird feelings that I get at night. I'm a university student, and in late 2021, I moved back into my dorm after being home during the pandemic. We had classes as usual, but whenever I came home, I would always realize that my cupboard door would be open, even though I definitely would have closed it for the majority of the day. The door to my cupboard has a metal locking too, so it can't be opened unless force is applied, and my windows are always closed for privacy, so there's no wind that could have blown it open or anything. Additionally, when I would study at my desk, my cupboard doors would creak or my bed would creak as if someone had just sat on it. Trying to be as logical as I can, I initially passed this off as just the building being very old or something to do with the pipes, and honestly, I just chalked it up to me imagining things, but these things also started happening when another one of my friends would come over. I told her about it because, well, it was freaking me out, and it would only ever happen at night too, which was weird. The way my room is oriented though, my bed is against the wall, so when I sleep I can either face the wall or face my desk and have my back facing against the wall, and I usually tend to sleep in the latter position because I could constantly feel a sort of tickling or prickling sensation on my back, and it would always prevent me from falling asleep. I would also feel a presence if I ever slept facing the wall, or sometimes my entire scalp would sort of get the same prickling sensation. I would feel absolutely insane when this happened, and wondered if there was something wrong with me in terms of my health, but after constant searching, I just couldn't find anything. As I said, this would only ever happen at night, never during the day if I took a nap, and it would never really happen if I spent the night at my parents' house. It was only ever in this room, and it freaks me out because it still happens sometimes too. I ended up telling my friends about it, and they believe me because weird stuff has happened to them too. But here's the really weird part. So, recently, I've been having terrible nightmares, and I've been waking up between the hours of 3 and 5 a.m., and I would wake up gasping or wake suddenly, sort of. But previously, there have been nights where I would wake up in the middle of the night for no apparent reason, even though the room would be dead silent and dark. In one of these nightmares, I dreamt of a white tiled floor and somebody that I knew getting their head bashed in, and there was just blood everywhere, and it was so red against the white tiles. Or in another dream, I felt as though I was being choked and couldn't scream, and I thought that this was all just sleep paralysis. Until last night, however, which is when I had the idea of sharing this story. So I had finished studying with my friends, and I was extremely exhausted as I had already had a long day. I was laying in bed replying to messages and just scrolling for about 10 minutes, when suddenly I felt this presence above me, and I looked up, and there was this thing leering down at me with a smile on its face. It was black and shadowy with long spindly fingers. I don't know how else to describe it, but it freaked me out. I was so tired though that I didn't know what to do, and I panicked, and I hid under my blanket, and I looked out a few times and it was gone, and so eventually I just fell asleep and didn't wake up until 7 a.m. A third friend who stays on my floor who has seen and heard ghosts before, she tells me the next day that she had really bad nightmares last night and tells me each of the 3 dreams. I was shocked because she explained that she never really had nightmares in the past, but last night she felt something in her room and she was unable to sleep. This all has me really freaked out, and I'm not really sure what to do about it all and how to protect myself. If you have any suggestions, then please do let me know, because this is all very new to me and To be honest, I'm just a bit lost. So this happened about 4 months ago. I, a 22-year-old male, was waiting for my turn at the clinic with my mother. We were supposed to be next in line to go in after the patient that was already with the doctor at the time. However, that person was there for so long, almost 2 full hours, and for some reason, that's when I just had a really weird feeling that something bad might happen. While we were still waiting outside, all of a sudden, a teenage girl walked in the door with her mother, who was coughing blood and looked to be in really bad shape. Couldn't walk on her own, bloodshot eyes, bruises all over her body. The girl then asked us, there were like 3 middle-aged women there. There were like 3 middle-aged women in there and an old man in addition to me and my mum, if someone could help her mum. One of the other women that were waiting for us explained to her that it isn't a hospital and that the clinic doesn't have the proper equipment to help her mum. Then someone else told her that there's a hospital nearby with emergency services and gave her its name and location. We then quickly started gathering some money for her before they went. All that while, the mum was still bleeding on the couch near us. Once I tried handing her the money, her mum, who didn't speak a word until then, pointed at me and screamed with all the blood coming out of her mouth. It really spooked me for some reason. It sounded like one of those animal screams that you hear when an animal gets severely hurt. Once the girl had collected enough money, I then asked her who told her to come here in the first place. She said the janitor, the short man by the building's entrance, which was super weird, since the janitor that we just passed by before we used the elevator and went into the doctor's office was a strikingly tall man, and he's always the only one here. But of course I didn't think of it then. Anyways, she got the money and she was leaving with her mother. I tried helping the girl, but as soon as the mother saw me, she started screaming her lungs out again. This time she was crying as well, while still pointing at me. The girl asked the old man to help her get her mum downstairs instead, and at that point, the patient that was with the doctor had finally got out, and I immediately went in. But about 15 minutes, when I was with the doctor, we heard that agonizing scream again. I was still creeped out from what had happened before, but I brushed it off. And when I was done with the doctor, I got out of the room and asked one of the women that were waiting there what that scream was, and why did they come back again. She said they came back shortly after when they couldn't find the taxi outside. Then she said the poor woman was shouting nonsense. When I said, like what? She said something along the lines of, where is he? Why is he hiding from me? Again, there were only 2 males in there. I was in the doctor's office while the old man was still outside, and then the old man went out with them and got them a taxi apparently, but when I discussed that with my mother when we got home, she suspected that it may have all been a hoax by the girl and her mother to scam people for charity. I guess I still don't know for sure if that was the case or not to this day, but that woman's look and the scream while pointing at me like that, man, it still gives me the creeps. When I was 14 or 15 during the summer, we used to travel up to Pennsylvania to visit my aunt and grandma. It was usually my mum, myself, and sometimes one of my sisters that would go with us. My brother and other sister would stay with my dad at home. But we usually only stayed there for maybe a week or 2. Where my aunt lived, it was country, like the closest neighbor was a good ways away. And when I was up there, I would hang out with my older cousin who was 17. They lived near a huge abandoned rundown building too. You could actually see it from my aunt's house, and it had a huge amount of land. My cousin says that it was a mental hospital at one point, but my aunt says that it was a hotel, but it shut down. I've tried looking it up, but I can't find any information on the building. But what I do know is that I remember this night very well. My cousin had a girlfriend. This girlfriend had a younger sister that I was interested in. My cousin was going to sneak out and visit her, and I asked if I could go with him. He said no, but reluctantly agreed after a few pleases, and to explain the path, we went through the dirt road that was lit up by a few streetlights. It was an easy 30-minute walk. If we walked through the lane by the building, it was a 10-minute walk, and he took a flashlight with him, and we made our way towards his girlfriend's house. Mind you, it was close to like 1 in the morning at this point. The way that we needed to walk, though, we had to walk by that old building, and don't know why, but it always gave me the willies walking by it. It felt like you had eyes on you, sort of. On the path there, nothing happened. We got to the house and we ended up leaving at almost 3 in the morning, and I had a lot of fun. But when we were walking back, my cousin commented how eerily quiet it was. This was a rural area where you can hear bugs and the nocturnal animals. He told me to walk fast, and I made fun of him for being scared. He told me to cut it out, and I remember kicking a rock on the ground. We were probably, 100 feet away from the building when he palms my chest in a sort of stopping motion. I look at him, and he has a sort of shushing motion and points forward. His face said it all, though. In fact, I'd never seen him like that. He was not an easy person to frighten, and I look up and all I can see is something white spinning, like as if a person was wearing a dress and was spinning, like they were dancing. It was dead silent. I moved the flashlight from the ground towards the white thing, and it was a lady, super pale, black hair. But as soon as the light hits her, she stops and she kind of just evaporates. She looked like she was heading towards the front door of the building. From where we were at, we could see the streetlights on the dirt road, and as soon as this happened, we just booked it down the road. My cousin and I didn't speak of it on the way home, but when we got to his room, I asked what the heck that was, and his response shook me to the core. I don't know, man, but I saw it staring at us from one of the windows of the building when we first passed by. I just didn't want to scare you. That explained why he was so serious and didn't want to joke with me on the way back, too. I have other experiences with that building, but I'll probably share those another time. Let me know what you think of this one. The house was built in 1922. Unsure exactly of all of its past history, but when I was little, I had oftentimes had these dreams where I would wander through my house in the night time, trying to find something or perhaps someone. The dream would always end when I find a tall, dark figure, nothing but a silhouette standing in the middle of my kitchen, exposed by the overhead light over the kitchen sink that hadn't even worked for years before. It was always in that dream, though. I would wake up sometimes hearing these voices, not angry or any emotional, but usually just 2 to 3 voices talking mid-sentences of audible English words that were distinguishable but didn't make sense of much, really. Sometimes I would even wake up frozen, like I couldn't breathe or move, but simply lay there with my eyes wide open for a few seconds while still hearing the voices speak briefly. My mother has always experienced things as well as my older sister. My mum hearing a jingle or eerie hymn coming from the back of the refrigerator, or maybe the pantry late at night sometimes. Things would turn on or off, and it was just a series of weird stuff. The year was 2001, though. I was 8 years old, when one night my mother woke up to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. She was frozen in her steps in the hall when greeted by a deep, hollow, and loud voice right in front of her, that of a man saying slowly and forced out, "Don't worry, everything will be all right." She turned on the lights and looked around, but didn't see anything. It was a snowy night, and she took a look outside, and there were no fresh footprints where anyone would have been around the home. She woke my dad up, though, to go investigate the voice, but my dad didn't believe in ghosts or anything of the sort. He came into my room and grabbed my wooden baseball bat, and it woke me up. I remember worrying for my dad and what was happening and wanted to go downstairs. I hadn't heard the voice in the hall myself. I just sort of stayed awake and listened, but eventually I fell back to sleep. I only heard of this story later on when I was a bit older and had finally knew that my dad came in for the bat that night for the reason that he did. My dad found nothing out of the ordinary, mind you. But my mum's father had passed away that previous year of a heart attack, and my dad's mother was suffering and dying of cancer at this time too. My mum seems to think that the message was in reference to those events. Throughout the years, my mum and sister would experience, most of which was lights on and off, and sometimes an eerie jingle from the kitchen at night. But fast forward to 2018. My parents are divorced and the house has been vacant for 2 years now, just to be heated during winter months. My wife and I decided to move in to rent from my dad since we were tired of the apartment living lifestyle, and the first night that I moved in and was unpacking, I immediately felt a strong presence of being watched. I couldn't shake the feeling too, and as my wife was working overnights at the coffee shop and I was alone, it happened a fair bit. The next day is when it started to all happen again as well. I got up for morning shift at 4:30 and I was brushing my teeth just in the other room. My wife woke up to a voice that said Earl. She asked me if I had said it, and I in fact didn't. Like I said, I was brushing my teeth at the time. I thought to myself though, oh no, here we go again. But I didn't tell her that. The next morning my wife was wide awake watching Netflix on her phone. 4:15 comes around, I snooze the phone. Not long after, we hear this bizarre jingle or hymn at the foot of the bed for like 8 to 10 seconds. It was long enough for her to shake me and say my name, and I still heard it. It kind of reminded me of Take Me Out to the Ball Game from one of those little teddy bears or something. So terrified though, we both threw the lights on and searched the room, but there was nothing but boxes of clothes in our room and nothing that could have possibly made that sound. We did get the house blessed the next day, and we hadn't experienced anything too far out after that. Occasionally a light would work itself, or the stove range fan would turn on by itself. It didn't work when we tried, mind you, which was really weird. But there was also another time where me and my wife were both standing right next to each other, and I was getting a phone call from her cell, but she was using her phone and it didn't even show that she was calling me. To be honest, I was too afraid to pick it up, but sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I did pick it up. Later on, we got home and my sister moved in and had one night experienced a disembodied voice at the end of her bed, just whistling the tune to the TV show that she had just finished watching. She had also taken videos and several orbs just floating around. I just asked her the other day if she experienced anything lately, and she says that she doesn't anymore. Her and her boyfriend are in a good and happy place in life for the moment, and she seems to think that this could be why she isn't experiencing weird things anymore. She also told me that she thought that the house was some sort of portal where many spirits would come through. I'm not sure what to think about that, but after me and my wife both hearing that hymn, it definitely must be something. Have any of these events ever happened to you? And what did you do about them? My boyfriend's uncle lives 2 to 3 hours from us, so we barely see each other, but maybe once or twice a year I guess we do. But he's just giving off some weird vibes, I guess. Not necessarily super creepy at first, but definitely weird. I sort of notice him checking me out sneakily, but I've been the victim of other things a few times in my life, and I brush it off as me being overly cautious or sensitive. The way that he talks and his accent are quite unique, and you recall it pretty easily, even without knowing him better. I know that he was addicted to alcohol in the past, but claims that he's sober now. Anyway, this happened twice, last year and the year before. Mind you, I have social anxiety, so unknown callers are a huge issue for me. The year before first. It was a rather quick event, but an unknown number called and a male voice very similar to his asked if I'm fine and what I'm doing right now. I was immediately stressed out and kept stuttering until he said that he had to hang up. Though it was super weird, I brushed it off and forgot about it after a few days. But last year, the phone rang around nighttime, maybe 9 to 10 p.m. Very unusual. Only a few family members call us in general, and never that late. Since it was an unknown number, and my mum calls with an unknown number. I picked up thinking that it was probably her, not even remembering the creepy call that I got a year before. But there was a male voice, speaking with the same accent, rather unusual where I live, and sounded very similar to him, but with slurred speech as if he was drunk. I panicked and didn't ask for his name, which I regretted later, but once again he called me by my name, asking how I've been and saying that he missed me. At this point, my anxiety is through the roof and I'm actually almost in tears. I now remember the last call, but I'm not able to ask any questions that would confirm his identity because I'm just frozen at this point. But he was breathing heavily and kept talking, which was hard to understand. He then asked me if I was bored and if I'm alone right now, as he would love to visit me. I immediately said no, my boyfriend is here, and he answered, what a pity, only to hang up again. He didn't call me again, but this all still lives in my head, I'm not gonna lie. I avoided him when he visited and tried to talk to my in-laws, but they think that I simply confused him for some random weirdo. But I'm absolutely sure that it was his voice, his accent. Also, I wrote my boyfriend's aunt about it on WhatsApp, asking if he called at night by accident. I tried to approach her slowly before opening up about the story, and she just blocked me without even saying a word. And everyone in the family thinks that that's just normal somehow. They're like, yeah, she's weird. Don't worry about it. She's always been a bit weird. But I mean, like, what the heck, right? I didn't do anything. I think her reaction, though, clearly was proof that I was right. I'm still creeped out today, the way that he talked to me on the phone like that, breathing heavily, and it honestly sounded like creepy guys in movies who call a woman and play with themselves or something. It was just disgusting and really triggering, and everybody behaving as if a complete nut job like this is normal, honestly, really sucks. So me and my boyfriend, we like going out dancing on the weekend, which always ends up with us stumbling into our favorite pizza place before joining the taxi queue. We've done this most weekends for over a year now, so we've become somewhat friendly with the guys who own the pizzeria. They know us by name and always make a big fuss over us, and offer us discounts every time too. But here's where it gets a little freaky. You see, last night, a Sunday night at 11 p.m, my boyfriend and I were in bed because we both had work this morning. My phone started ringing, which was weird for that time of night, and I saw it as an unknown number, so I just ignored it. But the next thing that we know, there's someone knocking on the front door. All the lights in the house were off, so we were clearly in bed, and not in. I had another call from the same number, and then the person knocking started hammering on the door and flicking the letterbox, even though I was a bit shaken and warned not to. If I had been alone in the house, I never would have answered. So he goes downstairs to answer the door, and lo and behold, it's one of the pizza guys from the pizzeria, holding 2 freshly cooked pizzas that we didn't order. He said not to tell the other guys at the shop apparently, but they were a gift from him to us, his favorite customers. My boyfriend took them from him and thanked him, but we couldn't get back to sleep for hours. We just felt really odd about the whole thing. We have ordered from them once for a takeaway, I think, so that's clearly how he got our address and my phone number, but it's still very weird, right? So I've had a stalker for about 4 years now. He was never aggressive or sent me proper threats, so stubborn as I am, I did my best to ignore him and not give him the satisfaction of showing him any fear. To be honest, after a while, I also wasn't even scared anymore, since he almost never came close to me. I know being stalked can affect people severely, even in a case like mine, and that's totally valid, but I guess I just got lucky and was never really psychologically affected by it. His stalking behavior mostly just consisted of sending me letters and gifts such as photos of my own apartment building from the outside, things that he dug out of my trash can, and so on. I called the police many times, but they weren't able to, or really tried to be honest, to catch or identify him. But about 3 weeks ago, I discovered the German version of the subreddit RIMA, and thought that people might want to know about what it's like to have a stalker. Since I barely use any social media, aside from Reddit, and have no personally identifying information here, I didn't think that he'd ever see it. One person even asked, "Does he know that you're putting him on blast on Reddit?" And I answered, maybe it would make him angry, maybe he'd be turned on. I don't know, and I don't really care. Well, I know the real answer now. He did see it, and he did not like it. Like I said, he was never aggressive and never came close to me. The closest that I know of was when he sent me a picture of myself unlocking my apartment door, taken from the corner of the steps above. Sorry if that doesn't make sense. I really don't know how else to explain it, but I consider myself a pretty vigilant person, and I'm thinking that he might have hid a camera there instead of being there to take the photo himself. I think I would have noticed him if he did. Anyway, I don't know how he got wind of the AMA, but he did. The next week was quiet, no letters, and I didn't see him anywhere. Then he left me letters with printed out questions and my answers from the subreddit. He also left me a long, hateful letter towards my boyfriend about an issue that I had posted. His letters were never hateful like that before, though he never seemed happy with my boyfriend. He wrote about how I should share the spotlight with him since I got so much attention thanks to him. A few days later, I got a gift, but this time he didn't leave it in my mailbox or at my car like he usually did. No, this time he left it inside the apartment building right in front of my door. I didn't take it inside my apartment, but opened it outside. It was a pretty big box, which was also unusual, and it was taped shut. As I'm sharing this, I realized that it wasn't a good idea at all and could have ended very badly for me, but luckily he didn't send me something terrible or anything. He did, however, send me several zip ties, a roll of tape, a TV remote with most buttons picked off, a pack of band-aids with a few used ones, and a framed picture of me. I could tell the picture was taken a few days ago, and my boyfriend was next to me but cut out of the photo. The frame was shattered, and the package was full of glass shards, clearly more than just what could have fallen out of the frame too, and they were also intentionally put inside the crumbled newspaper that was stuffed in there and to keep it all in place and stuff. Anyway, I called the cops right away and gave it to them. They were more concerned this time, finally, thankfully, and told me that they'd send patrol cars more frequently. He didn't show up or leave me any letters or gifts for about another week and a half after that. But 8 days ago, it started again. I found letters in my mailbox where he wrote about how he wasted his time on me, how I haven't been appreciating his effort, how he was wrong about me being special. 5 days ago, I left my apartment in the morning and heard a crunch sound as I stepped on my doormat. He had put broken glass under it in the night. I went off to work because I was in a hurry and was just going to make my boyfriend call the police, but then I found my car had also been vandalized. The sides were scratched, the lights were smashed, and the windshield had a phrase painted on it. "It's time soon. Miss my last name." I went back inside and called the cops myself. They found the same phrase on a note under the doormat. This time they really took me seriously, which might have been because I was just, angry at this point, which I made very clear. If for some reason you're like me and just too stubborn to be afraid of a stalker like mine, then all of this, the letters, the gifts, the photos, even the glass under my doormat, are just really annoying and inconvenient. But my car was useless to me now, and the threat, it scared even me. I did, however, have a dash cam in my car, and it caught everything. The police said that they would take the footage as evidence, even though the dash cam footage wasn't of high quality, and I had given them photos of him that were just as good before, but they said that it wasn't enough. And they told me that they'll look into it further and promised to send more patrol cars again. Then it was quiet for 2 more days. Until 2 days ago. Someone rang the doorbell at just after 4 a.m. My boyfriend and I got up, but we were both hesitant, but I saw blue lights outside, and just as I got up, I heard them shouting. "This is the police, please open the door." They told us that they were called by one of the downstairs neighbours who came home from his night shift about an hour earlier and heard someone else enter the building after them before the door fell shut. My neighbours actually know of my situation, and I've asked them to make sure that they don't let strangers into the building. This neighbour then went into his own apartment and looked through the peephole. We have motion-activated lights in the stairway, so he waited to see if they turned back on, and they did. Then he saw a middle-aged man walk upstairs. Above this neighbour, there are only me and my boyfriend and a single mum with 3 kids who probably won't be getting any visitors at 3 a.m. So, naturally, he called the police. They came, and they found my stalker 1/2 floor above me on the stairs. He should have been able to see the cop car since there's a little window up there and they had their lights on, but he either missed them or wanted to get caught. They found a pocket knife on him and he confessed to being my stalker right away. He was finally caught. They got him. It took 4 years, a provocative Reddit post, and one very vigilant and caring neighbour, but he's finally done. For now, at least, he's facing several charges, and I've collected every single piece of evidence over the past 4 years. I don't know what kind of outcome I can expect, but for now, at least, I finally have some peace. I work a very early morning schedule at my job. I go in at 2 in the morning and work until noon 4 days a week. I used to sleep in until about maybe 7 o'clock on my days off because of just how exhausting my schedule is. But recently, I found it easier to just wake up at my normal time at 1 o'clock in the morning every day of the week. It's not easy, but I get paid good money at my job, and waking up at the same time every day assures that I won't be exhausted all the time trying to balance my schedule out every week. I'm very disciplined though about my health and well-being, so I've always been a bit of a runner. I always try and get about 15 to 20 miles of running in every week. I've always preferred running outdoors rather than on a treadmill in some gym somewhere, but where I live, it can get a bit hot outside, so I've always ran earlier in the morning or late at night. Ever since getting my job, I've went for my runs at 2 o'clock in the morning on my days off. I actually find it very relaxing, and I love the emptiness of the streets at night. The atmosphere provokes a lot of deep thoughts within me, which always makes my runs easier. Now, I'm a very tall and muscular guy, so I've never been too terrified of running into some creep at night on my runs. I also used to take karate when I was in high school, so I always feel as if I can defend myself if a situation of sorts ever presented itself. Basically, if someone ever tried to get tough with me, I'd be more scared for them than I would myself. However, my self-confidence and courage recently disappeared after encountering, well, whatever that thing was on one of my runs. A couple of months ago, I was on my morning run, running the same route as I always do. I was about 2 miles into a 5-mile run, meaning I was 2 miles away from home. I always run on the outskirts of the giant park that borders the north side of my town. It's filled with trees and bushes and a lot of animals, so it isn't uncommon to have some encounters with badgers or possums or birds at night, and I've grown used to all of the weird noises that I hear coming from the trees. However, this night was different. The oddest thing was that I didn't hear anything out of the ordinary while running along the path next to the park, but I got this deep sort of dreadful feeling in my stomach. I'd never felt anything like it before. Fear arose within me, and I had no idea why. I guess my sixth sense kicked in that night or something. I didn't know what I was feeling or even thinking, really. I just knew that I had to get out of there as fast as I could. My jog turned into a run, which then turned into a sprint. My senses knew that I was being followed by someone or something. I felt the leaves crumbling at my feet with each step that I took. I didn't even think about where I was running or where I was heading as long as I got out of there. I wanted to look behind me just to know if I was actually running from something or if I was just being paranoid, but my body just wouldn't let me look. I was too afraid to know the truth, I guess. The dread and the fear only began to grow within me too. Even after running for a good couple of minutes, I still didn't feel safe. Suddenly, too, I found myself trying to shout and yell for help, but I couldn't. I couldn't even make a sound. I was hardly even breathing. My vocals seemed to be drowning in my despair, and I was about out of breath at this point, so I made the mistake of turning around in hopes to find myself alone with no one chasing me. But as I turned around, my foot kicked into a rock sticking out of the ground, and I fell to my face. In fear, I looked behind me. In fear, I stood up and prepared myself for whatever came my way. My flight reactions were about to turn into fight reactions, I think. I clenched my fists and stood up straight, making myself appear as threatening as I could. But surprisingly, I found myself alone. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Nothing. Why would I be so afraid, though? What was I running from? Was I that paranoid? I had a hard time believing that this was all my imagination, but that's what my eyes were saying, because nobody was there. Nothing was there. I felt relief, I guess, and I began to slow walk home on a bit of a limp, trying to catch my breath. I was farther from home now than I was before, and the only way back home from where I was back on that path next to the park where I had just come from. I decided this time to walk directly through the park to avoid the same path that I was just on instead. I soon regretted this decision, however. I had never walked through the park at night before, so I had no idea that there were no lights on this path. In fact, it was pitch black, the darkest black that I had ever seen all around. But I couldn't turn back now. I had to get home, and I wanted to put all of this behind me. I kept putting one foot in front of the other and only looked forward. As long as I felt the pavement below me, I knew that I was going in the right direction. Suddenly, though, I felt my stomach drop yet again. That same feeling and the same fear grew within me. This wasn't the exact same, though. I knew that I was in real danger, and it wasn't just paranoia this time, because this time I saw something, and it's weird. Bear with me here as I try to explain this. In this pitch darkness, the darkest black that I had ever seen, I saw something. How is hard to explain though, but I saw this figure moving in front of me, and it was darker than the black night. The deepest, darkest thing that I'd ever seen in my life was moving toward me on a path that I was walking on. This time I didn't fight. I didn't run. I completely froze, dead in my tracks. I couldn't make myself move. I tried, but I was just completely paralyzed. I had to watch the darkness of whatever this thing was approach me. The dark black of this thing grew closer and closer until everything was darker than black around me. I felt immersed in darkness all of a sudden. I opened my mouth to make a sound, and this time I actually could. I let out a fearful cry and closed my eyes, and I felt nothing. I can't explain this feeling, but I just felt nothing. I honestly thought for a moment that I was dead, but the sounds of birds chirping slowly faded in. Too afraid to open my eyes, I continued to listen to the chirping of the birds, and in the distance I could even hear the voices of people. I felt a soft breeze touch my nose, and I finally worked up the courage to open my eyes, and now it was daytime, and the morning dew covered me. I was laying in the park, on the path, right where I was, attacked or whatever by this thing. But how could it be morning already? A few seconds ago, I was just in the darkness of these woods, and all of a sudden it was daylight? Whatever the case, I felt completely exhausted and confused, and I headed for home without question. I'm still confused about this experience every day that I think about it. I've never slept a walk in my life that I know of, or have had any other occurrences like this ever since. I still can't explain what happened to me that night, but it's safe to say that I don't run at 2 a.m. any longer. Several months ago, I had a bit too much to drink with some friends one night. I arrived back to my car at around 12 a.m, and I decided that I was not in any condition to drive. I grabbed whatever blankets and jackets that I had, curled up in the back seat, and I fell asleep. At around 4 a.m, though, I woke up sort of hungover, but much more sober than before. I reached to the front and started my car to warm it up. As I sat down and looked out the rear window, I saw a man. He was wearing a dark hoodie with a red backpack on. He was standing under a streetlight, just staring at me from the middle of the parking lot. I was confused. It was dark, and I thought that I was just seeing things at first. But then he started walking towards my car. I have never, ever jumped in that driver's seat with such swiftness in my life. I swear my heart felt like it stopped too. He proceeded to stop and just stood there watching me drive away, and I thought that I caught a glimpse of something shiny in his hand, but it still makes me feel uneasy to this day. I'd like to believe that he was just watching me sleep, but needless to say, I will not be sleeping in my car ever again. So, this is our last resort, because I've looked on a bunch of forums, I've looked all over the internet, but I don't see much in terms of results. I've read that it could possibly be an incubus, but that just sounds a little too mythical to me, I guess. I've never been a paranormal believer or a religious person, but I do respect it because of my grandmother. She believes heavily in this stuff and even has CDs full of supposed captures of demons and angels and whatnot. Lots of orbs, mysterious figures and the like. I admit too that they are a little bit strange. She's had them looked at but was told to stop taking pictures because there was apparently something following her and it was not a good being. She also reports experiences where she's seen my great-grandma and grandpa. My aunt, her daughter, who has lived with her, confirmed some of her own experiences as well. The four were very close when my great-grandparents were alive. And well, now I live with my grandma, but this thing has me on the fence of belief, I'll tell you that much. I say on the fence though because truly I could be just going insane. I don't know. I don't want it to be real, to be honest. The only mental problems I've ever had though is depression and anxiety, so there's that, I guess. My grandma does have a prescription of schizophrenia that she'd stopped taking a while ago, but it's the cleanly worried about mess kind of schizophrenia. My aunt is mentally stable is what I'm getting at. Never took a drug. I have also been having dreams of a sexual nature. I rarely remember dreams, but they've been vivid recently, and also one where I was being told some type of secret and that if I told anyone I was done for or dead or something by a vague blonde man in robes. He was bringing me in to show me something, and I blurrily remember some type of necklace with an eye symbol on it. But the weirdest thing is that every second of the day I feel something near me or touching me inappropriately. I work from home too, so I have to really focus, and it really gets to me. I've prayed, bought religious candles, put a pillow between my legs, put my hair up from my neck, worn tight clothing or no clothing at all, turned off all wind makers, closed windows, held my breath to stop making any moves, to check to see if I was just being paranoid, if it was a draft or just my clothing moving or something when I was breathing. But no, I feel it. I feel someone touching me sometimes, and it's still here. I think I maybe accidentally called it one time as well. My boyfriend is on a Navy boat underway currently, so I've been more wanting for certain things lately, and one night, about a week ago, it was particularly bad, so I was doing maintenance, I guess you could call it. And that's when it started. I let it happen because of obvious reasons, but I was really confused and thought maybe I was just dreaming. I now go to sleep bundled up around my groin area. That makes it go away, but it wakes me up either way around 2-ish or 3-ish every time without fail, in which I'll be in completely different positions on the bed with whatever it is touching me. Whatever it is, I don't feel that it's evil. It just has a one-track mind, I guess. I tried talking to it once, and I know that sounds crazy, but it doesn't really respond. So I stopped talking to it entirely, ignored it for hours. Same thing though, it never leaves. Also, just on the touching stuff, it's not always sexual or anything, but there's like a caressing of my face, my back, my neck, or my legs sometimes. Sometimes it even seems to get angry with me or something and pinches my nose. Sometimes, too, I get a really odd pressure on my ear, and it makes it ring a bit. Also, depending on the temperature in the room, it's been a very warm touch or a very cold touch. 50-50, really. I thought traditionally that their touch was only cold, or so I've been told, so this came as a real surprise to me. To be honest with you, though, I really don't know what to believe about any of this. I sort of hope that I'm just sort of crazy now, I guess. I think I'm going to go and get an assessment, but I would just like some theories and possibly some help or something. Or do I need to be admitted into a psych ward? What do you guys think? Also, we stopped using gas for heating, so it's not hallucinations from a gas leak or anything, and it's a brand new tank as well. Again, I just don't know what this is. I don't know if it's a ghost, if it's just all in my mind, or maybe if it's something evil. A couple of years ago, my buddy and I were bored one afternoon and decided to explore an abandoned house that I'd spotted earlier that week when I was out on a drive. We live in a town that is mostly suburbs, but if you drive 5 minutes north, it's all country roads, farmland, forest, etc. The abandoned house that I spotted was in the middle of a field. There wasn't a paved road or gravel driveway that led up to it, so we parked as close as we could on the side of the road and walked through the tall grass to reach it. The house looked pretty old, most likely built in the early 1900s. There were plants engulfing the entire home, and part of the roof was missing from what looked like fire damage. It had obviously been abandoned for some time at this point. My friend told me that he was going to hang back when we came close to the house. He just couldn't shake the feeling that something was off and said that he was getting bad vibes. I, though, decided to keep going. But when I reached the house, I looked in through the windows and saw lots of weather damage and signs of neglect. The door, however, was locked. I walked around the perimeter of the house and found a cellar door, unlocked. I entered and slowly started walking down an old wooden staircase. I got about halfway down and squinted, waiting for my eyes to adjust to the darkness. The only light source was the sunlight coming in from the open cellar door, and it was full of old belongings, furniture and junk. But then, in the far right corner, I saw what looked like a figure standing in the darkness facing me. My stomach sank. It was a tall person just standing there, straight, with their arms at their side. I couldn't make out what they were wearing or any facial features. I stood there for a few seconds staring back at them in shock. I thought it had to be my mind playing tricks on me at first, so I squinted harder trying to make out if what I was seeing was actually a tall figure, when suddenly it moved slightly and made a deep grunting sound. At that, I panicked and I ran up the stairs as fast as I could. When my friend saw the look on my face when I exited the basement, he started running towards the car. He said that it looked like I'd seen a ghost or something. When we drove away, I kept looking back to see if we were being followed or anything, but nobody was there. So I, a 41-year-old female, have had a sleep condition called REM, sleep behavior disorder, that causes me to occasionally continue dreaming after part of my brain is woken up. So I can look around my room and see things that are just not there. This is common enough for me that after the initial panic wears off, I get over it pretty quickly. That is, until the night my partner at the time saw it too. So I woke up in my bed, flat on my back. Above me was a solid black humanoid creature with smooth features, long, thin limbs. Its mouth was open, very close to mine. I felt like it was studying me, maybe. My heart was racing, as it always is when I have these sleep disturbances. I jolted in fear, and the thing vanished. I took some big deep breaths and thought to myself how messed up that episode was. It felt really real. I felt its curiosity in its expression, and it was so close to my face that it was almost touching me. My dreams are usually vivid, but man, this was different. I felt my heart, which was beating like crazy, and took another breath to help slow it down. Then my partner in the bed beside me said, "Did you see that too?" I hadn't yet said anything out loud at that point, except for gasping for air, so I asked him what he saw. He said that he saw a black creature leaning over me. He said that it skittled down to the foot of the bed and over the edge. He said that it was a shadow person or something like it. I never heard of them, but I was freaking out at this point and turned on all the lights. I made him go look under the bed, and there was nothing there. He was into supernatural stuff. I never was, and other than this event, I still am not. I prefer science, I guess. I like things that I can measure and explain. But this experience, him seeing something that I rationalized in my mind as a dream gone bad, just did not line up with my worldview. I didn't sleep that night. Everything just sort of buzzed with creepy energy, and I wasn't having it. I mean, where did this thing go? Where the heck did it come from in the first place? What was it doing on my bed? Why was it looking so intensely at me? I have a son too, and at the time he was about 14. I didn't tell him what I saw for obvious reasons. But when he was 2, he actually had a fever that induced a seizure at one point. It was a terrible experience for me, more than him, I guess, but he was back to normal within maybe a few hours, and I was traumatized for years. But any time that he got a fever after that, he tended to become disorientated and easily confused. So he developed a fever in the night. I don't even remember what it was from, and I didn't know about it until the morning. He tells me, shaken, that he had a horrible, horrible night sleeping. He said that he felt like something was in the room all night. He told me that he saw a creature, a little black guy in his room. Every time that he opened his eyes, it would sort of back off, but when he closed them, it would always come closer. He said that it happened all night, and he barely slept. It's important to note, too, that I'm not into supernatural things at all. I don't really believe it in fact. Like I said, I sort of lean into science, but when my son told me this story, I leaned into whatever I could to clear out space of this unwanted guest. A friend recommended that I contact an elder from a local First Nations community and asked if she could help us. She came and did a ceremonial cleansing and blessing of our home, and family as well, and asked the ancient spirits to protect us and keep us safe. After that, we didn't see the shadow person again. I still cannot explain what happened that night. The elder said that there was a portal open near the center of our home, apparently, and she politely asked the being to leave, and I don't know, I guess it did. We eventually moved out of that house, and to be honest, I really don't miss it. When I was younger, 18 to 24 years old, I worked at my family's trucking company. It was a small operation with around 17 trucks. I did the dock compliance and log auditing. One Friday, as I was preparing to go home, I was informed that they had decided to open a warehouse as well, and I would be responsible for setting it up and the daily operations. They handed me a set of keys for the building and an address to report to on Monday. Guessing, being the youngest member of the family working there meant I was the first one to get moved around to other jobs. So, Monday comes and I show up to the building at 8 in the morning. It was an old metal manufacturing building that was built in the 60s. The company that originally built and occupied the building had closed years ago, and the new owner had divided the building into 50-foot wide by 200-foot long sections that each had a long front door, a rear door with steps, dock door and plate, and 2 small bathrooms built in the front left corner of the unit. After we had been open for a couple of weeks, they built a small office in the right corner of our unit so that I could have a space to set up a computer for inventory control and invoicing. As this was a small warehouse operation, I was the only employee. When we needed something shipped out to one of our customers, they would send our local delivery driver over with a tractor, a sort of trailer thing, to deliver the product. And at first, everything was good. I would show up and wait for orders to come in and then pull the pallets and let dispatch know that I needed the driver to bring the tractor trailer and make a delivery. It was a pretty boring job, if I'm being honest, as I was the only one there, really. One day, though, after we had been open for about 6 months, I was rotating pallets in the aisle, and as I backed out of an aisle with the forklift, I saw an old man out of the corner of my eye. As I was supposed to be the only person in the warehouse, and I was certain all the doors were locked, I turned to cuss out whoever was standing there, but when I turned, there was nobody there. I chalked it up to my imagination, and I went on about my business. It was probably 2 weeks before I saw the old man again, I think. I was getting pallets pulled for an order, and I was backing out of the aisle, and I saw him again out of the corner of my eye. He would always just be standing there in blue jean overalls and a red button-down flannel shirt. When I would turn to look at him, he was always gone, though. This happened off and on for about a year when I was told that I was moving back to the main office and that they were hiring someone else to run the warehouse. I worked at the main office for about 1 year after that, and they decided that they wanted to expand the warehouse by getting the section next to ours that had just been vacated. So now we had 2 identical sections, and the owners were going to cut and frame a hole in the wall by the dock area so that we could use our forklift on both sides. So, come Monday morning, I start working at the warehouse with Jonathan, the guy that was hired to take my place. As this was an on-demand shipping warehouse for manufacturing companies, we had a lot of downtime there. I had been there for about a month, and we were sitting in the office goofing about, just talking about this and that, and I mentioned how the warehouse was kind of creepy. Jonathan replies with, yeah, especially that old guy who you'll see standing at the end of the aisles as you're working. Now, I had never met him before working together and never mentioned seeing the old man to anyone. I mean, I would sound crazy, right? We started trading stories, though, about seeing this old guy, and 30 minutes later we went back to work. After we had discussed the old man is when things started heating up, though. We'd be working in the warehouse, and we would hear the bathroom doors on the opposite side of the office wall open and slam closed. You would hear footsteps, and when you went to investigate them, there would be nobody there. To try and stop the bathroom doors opening and closing, I even put padlocks on them. And this stopped it for a while, but one day as we were sitting in the office, I heard the bathroom doors open and slam close so hard they shook the wall, which was made of 6 layers of fireproof sheetrock. We ran to the other side of the warehouse, and both doors were closed, but the locks were laying on the floor still locked. I don't even know how that's possible, to be honest. Fast forward 6 months, and I get a call at midnight that one of our customers has an audit in the morning and needs to have a count of all their product in our warehouse by 8 a.m. So I get dressed and drive to the warehouse. I get there at around 1 in the morning and have to walk 200 feet in the pitch black to the back of the warehouse to turn the lights on. I start doing the inventory when I hear 3 loud knocks on the back door. I just froze and listened. Then 3 more loud knocks on the door. I said to myself that there's just no way I'm answering that. Then the roll-up dock door, which is a good 4 or 5 feet off the ground, started shaking violently like someone was trying to rip it off. I threw my clipboard on the ground and I ran out the front door and jumped in my car. I was about 3 miles down the road when I pulled into a church parking lot and talked myself into going back to the locked doors. I drove around back to see if maybe it was a truck driver that had showed up early, but there was nobody around back in the dock area. I drove back around the front and I locked the door and went home. Now, the final experience was one night as I was going to bed. My wife always went to sleep before me as I'm a bit of a night owl. I had laid down in bed and just sort of started falling asleep when my wife goes, "Why are you standing at the foot of the bed?" When I say my heart stopped beating, I am not exaggerating. I sit up in bed and at the foot was a shadow figure, just standing there, and as I share this, I still get cold chills just remembering it. I jumped out of bed, and as soon as I did that, it was just as if this thing just disappeared. Like, didn't fade out or anything, it just sort of vanished right before my eyes in like milliseconds. As this was during the age of the internet, I started looking up information, and the main thing that I kept seeing was, if it isn't trying to cause you harm, then just try speaking to it. So the next day, when I went to work, I stood in the middle of the warehouse and just said out loud, "I'm not sure who you are or what you want, but I acknowledge that you're here. I mean you no harm, I just work here and am here to do a job. You're welcome to stay here if you're friendly, and I'll leave you alone if you leave me alone." I did similar when I got home, except I stated that this was my home and that they were not welcome. I wanted them to leave, and since that day, I surprisingly have never experienced anything else at the warehouse or my home ever again. I no longer work for my family or at our warehouse, but I still drive by there sometimes, and I think about the old man in the overalls. Hopefully, whoever he is, he's doing all right. So this story takes place back in the late summer of 2007. I was 18 years old, had graduated high school, and was looking forward to starting college in just a couple of weeks. I'm a tall guy, a bit over 6 foot, and was lanky in build back then. My dad and I had a yearly tradition of going on a trip to Reading where we'd stay at a hotel for the weekend and go to the water slides, see a movie, grab dinner from a fancy restaurant or two, and just generally have a good time away from home. It was Saturday and we'd gone to the water slides all day. Once the sun was setting, we decided that we'd go to an In-N-Out for dinner and then had planned to go to the movies later in the evening. We were going to go and see Rush Hour 3, but on this particular occasion, my dad had gotten pretty wiped out and decided that he would just relax at the hotel. I still wanted to go to the movies, and he said that it was okay. So he dropped me off at the movie theater, which was only a couple of miles from the hotel that we were staying at, and I told him that he didn't have to wait up for me. I just walked back after the movie. While I was waiting in line, I noted that there was a surprising amount of people around my age, all going to see a movie called Superbad. It was starting 10 minutes later than Rush Hour 3, and I was so curious to see what it was about that I changed to that movie, and it was a great time. The movie let out close to midnight, and I was full of energy. The moon was full, and it was warm at night in Reading, low 70s, so I was in good spirits as I started leisurely walking back to the hotel. Now, on my way back, I noticed a silver car pulling out from a nearby street. It was late and on a quieter part of the city, so there wasn't a whole lot of traffic at that time, so it was definitely notable. It sort of slow rolled up to me, and the passenger window rolled down. Inside was a guy who might have been in his late 20s or early 30s if I had to guess. He was clean-shaven with dark hair and decently dressed. He asked me if I needed a ride. I thought it was a little bit odd, but he was smiling and seemed friendly enough. I'd had such a good day and was still full of energy though, so I said no thanks and told him that I was just going to walk back to my hotel. His smile faltered for a moment, and he asked if I was sure. I nodded, assuring him that I'd be all right. He shrugged his shoulder and asked one last time if I was certain, and I said yeah, and then I began to walk. He drove off, and I honestly thought that that was the end of it. But it wasn't. About 2 minutes later, I was still walking along the street, and I saw a car coming on the opposite side of the road. There was a cement driver on the center of the road, and it only had a couple of areas where cars could turn around, and I'd been distracted with my thoughts. I wasn't looking for it, but I thought that it might have been the same car at first. I glanced back, and I could just barely see where the road curved, and the car turned around at the same intersection. It turned around, came driving back down my way, and I knew that it was the same car with the guy that I'd talked to earlier. I saw him looking at me as he passed by me again. Chills went down my spine too for some reason. I began to walk faster, but not too much, as I was giving him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he thought that he'd forgotten something, but then realized that he hadn't. Either way, I was paying attention now. Sure enough, as I walked forward, I saw him drive by on the opposite side of the road again. Any doubts that I had disappeared, and now I was on edge, ready to bolt if I saw this car slow down next to me. I saw him drive by again, but also some other truck drove by on the opposite side of the road, and his car passed me by. At this point, I couldn't see where he could turn around, but I knew the streetlights he could use weren't too far ahead either. I looked around, and across the street from me were some businesses, and they had bushes in front of them. I waited until I couldn't see the silver car anymore, and I ran across the street and hid behind the bushes, using them for cover. I watched and waited. I tied my shoes tight as my heart was pounding, hoping that he wouldn't come by again. But he did. I saw his silver car drive by my hiding spot and let out a sigh of relief as he didn't suddenly decide to drive into the parking lot where I was. But I didn't move either. I knew that he could turn around again, so I kept waiting. He drove by again on the opposite side of the street. I then started counting for 10 minutes, or 600 seconds. I decided that if I saw his car drive by, I would start again and would still be ready to run just in case. The 10 minutes went by and I didn't see this car again, so I got up, shakily made my way back to the hotel, keeping an eye out for any new cars coming my way, and thankfully none did. My dad woke up when I got back to our hotel room and I told him what happened. He got up and took a look around the hotel parking lot before saying that we should probably lock the door, draw the curtains and get some sleep. And we left early the next day. I'm really glad that I didn't get into that guy's car that night because I just recently heard that there had apparently been a number of kidnappings in that area around that time, with people getting taken after getting into seemingly friendly strangers' cars at night. And who knows, maybe I met the kidnapper that night. My family and I went on a trip to the Hocking Hills area of southern Ohio a few weeks ago. There was a place that I always wanted to visit, the abandoned ghost town Moonville Rail Tunnel. I've never been to this area, so I didn't know what to expect, but I did know that it was pretty deep in the woods. We took a trip from our rented cabin using Google for GPS to the location. We start driving and it's, for lack of a better word, real impoverished where we're driving, sort of Hills Have Eyes-esque. We literally only see a few cars on the way there and are on the back roads. When we get to a point where we need to enter into a forest and we're close to the tunnel, there was a sign that said that we were entering Bubblewood. For a little bit of additional information too, I drive a Mercedes that I'm just lucky to have, and I have my husband in the car, a black man with dreadlocks, my 10-year-old son, who is non-verbal autistic, and my 6-year-old daughter as well. We drive down this really creepy stone road into the forest, and there's really nothing back there. No houses, no cars, nobody. We see signs that we're close, and we pull into the parking lot. There's a footbridge with some stuff on it that people put there. We walk over the footbridge and make our way toward the tunnel, which is a lot larger than I expected. We hear this sound coming from the other side of the tunnel that goes into the woods away from the parking lot, and soon a truck comes driving through the tunnel toward us while we're on foot. Whoever's in the truck, he gets out of it with a chainsaw, and it's a white guy in his 60s. He walks with my entire family everywhere that we go, and even through the tunnel. I tried to make small talk with him and pull some info about if he worked for the Department of Natural Resources or something, but he really wasn't budging. We turn around to walk out of the tunnel, and he starts using a chainsaw behind us, and the sound is just echoing through this tunnel. At this point, we have no cell phone service, and literally nobody knows my family is out there except us. I was already worried my car was sending the wrong idea to people, like we have money or something, which we don't. But we rush to the car and get the kids in their booster seats, and this guy comes driving over the footbridge in his truck towards us in the parking lot. I honestly don't even know how this truck fit on it. He stops again and gets out of his truck and starts walking the other direction, much to our relief. But it was about this time that I then noticed that there are dusty handprints on my car. I asked my husband if they were a match. I don't know who could have touched the car, honestly, because we were with the chainsaw man the entire time that we were there. But at that, we get out of there as fast as we can. Just a few minutes later, I look into my rearview mirror though, and there's a bunch of dust kicked up behind us, and there he is. He had to have driven pretty quickly on the stone road to catch up to us like that. I mean, there's nowhere to go in these woods. The road is basically one lane, and we have no cell service or GPS or anything now. Every time that I think we lose him as well, he's there again. I'm waiting for my tires to get popped or something, or for this guy to ram me off the road into a ravine in the woods, but finally we get out of the woods and I turn out and he's still following. We were following printed directions to get back, and I ended up making a wrong turn in the excitement, I guess you could say. The guy in the truck was finally gone at this point, and I turned around to go back past the stone road that goes into the forest. The guy in the truck was finally gone at this point, and I turned around to go back past the stone road that goes into the forest. There's only one lone house near this road, and there is his truck, parked there. And I mean, he had to have seen us drive onto this road into the woods and taken some back way to the tunnel or something. To this day, I don't know if he was just trying to protect the site from more graffiti or what, but he really creeped us out. It was like every scary movie trope rolled into one single event, and it was terrifying, to say the least. So every year, my friends and I go on a week-long canoe trip in Algonquin Park, usually just to drink and fish. The past summer, we had decided to stay on Tom Thompson Lake, if you know it, for our main site, which ended up being on an island in the middle of the lake. There were 6 of us in total, with one group of 4 in a large tent, one guy in a solo tent, and myself in a hammock between them. Now one night, we had been huddled around the fire at about 1 a.m. when we noticed a flare in the sky over what we assumed was an adjacent lake. We didn't think much of it until an awful scream came across the lake about 20 minutes later. I was the only one left sober at this time, and there wasn't much that we could do, so we assumed that it was a problem bear in the area that we'd been warned about from the outfitters. But the strange part came after everyone had gone to bed. At 4 a.m., the other 5 guys went into their tents and passed out while I lay in my hammock listening to them fall asleep. For reference, the group of 4 were about maybe 30 feet to my right, and the other guy about 100 feet to my left on the far shore. As I watched the stars and tried to will myself to sleep, I noticed everything had gone incredibly silent. Suddenly feeling creeped out, I slowed my breathing and stayed as still as I could, thinking about the possible bear and how I was a neatly wrapped up meat sack hanging there. But then, I heard a voice call out about 20 feet to my left, by the remains of our fire. It was the voice of my friend Seamus, who was one of the guys passed out in the large tent, or so I thought. 4 hellos, with each one sounding sort of more, I don't know, like emotionless, I guess you could say. The 4 hellos all said within maybe 6 seconds, and although I immediately recognized his voice, every instinct that I had was on high alert, telling me not to respond. I stayed as quiet as I could for the next 5 minutes, listening for any movement, until I felt the tension leave the air, and it disturbed me a lot to know how normally you can hear every movement in the site, and yet that night, at that moment, I heard absolutely nothing. Not one thing, not even crickets or anything. The wind even seemed to die down. Anyway, the next morning, everyone told me that they'd heard nothing, but we agreed to move sites early since we'd all gotten an eerie vibe from that night. This was our 6th trip there too, and we've never had any creepy experiences before, so this one was out of the blue. I hope that what I heard that night was just some camper with a very similar voice to my friend who had come to see if the site was free or something, or Seamus had somehow stealthily slept walk out of his tent, but I don't know. Neither one of them really seems plausible. I mean, I 100% would have heard someone moving for sure. I can only hope nothing happens on future trips for other people, I guess, or for us if we go back there, but it will be hard to forget the fear of this event. So I, a 16-year-old female, found out recently that my grandmom was in the graduating class at Revere High School of 1978. At that time, she was 18, and this story came out because she said something when I told her about the new series on Netflix. Now, you guys should know who I'm talking about. I told her about it, and she goes, "Oh yeah, I remember him," and I obviously told her that a lot of people know him because, you know, of all the things that he's done and all that. And she stops me and goes, No, I actually graduated with him." I stood there completely frozen. Now, she showed me the yearbook picture, but I don't know if I'm comfortable sharing that on the internet because I don't want people to find out information about my family and all that. But I couldn't lie about this, especially this. I mean, it would be terrible to do that. So, I'll tell you some things that she told me, though. This was about 2 weeks ago, so I'll try and remember what she said, word for word. This is how it went. Now, I did go to high school with him, but there were so many kids in that school. I barely even talked to him. Everything you hear about him from high school is basically the 100% truth. He was the definition of weird. He would actually come to school drunk on some days. The only reason that some people started to notice who he was because he would spaz out as some sort of a joke, and he would act like a kid with special needs almost. I don't remember if I had any memorable conversations with him, but I do remember one specific time I saw him in the hallway. I'd only heard about what he's done, but I didn't know if it was actually true, so I asked him, "Aren't you the boy who puts on those acts in the hallways?" "Yes, I am," he said. "Why? Do you find me funny?" "Well, sure, everyone does. I've never really seen you, though. I've only heard the stories people tell. Just wanted to know if it was you." "Well, you're right, it is me. Glad you find my jokes enjoyable." And he smiled at me. Not a toothy smile, but a grin, I guess. I don't remember talking to him again after that. That was towards the end of the school year. Then the school year ended, and to my luck, he actually appeared in my college. He got kicked out shortly after for, I think, a drinking problem. I never knew of his family life, frankly. I didn't want to know, but I could tell that it wasn't good, and perhaps that's why he was drinking. I never saw him again after that. Well, actually, I did, but it was on TV. When I found out what he did, though, I can't even begin to describe how I felt about it, being the fact that I knew him a bit and went to school with him. I'm not saying that he was normal. I mean, with anybody that turns out like this, people normally say, "I could never see them doing this." But it disgusted me in ways that I can't describe. The first thing the news said was that they caught somebody who they described as a murderer. And later on, they let out the details of what he actually did, and that's what really shook people. Seeing the new series really helps people understand how disgusting that man is. And well, it shows you what he went through, I guess, as well. It doesn't make you feel bad for him, which nobody should. I'm glad that he went out the way that he did. Maybe if I didn't ask him the question that day, I wouldn't have felt so uneasy about the whole thing, but yeah, I did, and that's what happened. So yeah, that's basically it in a nutshell from my grandmom, and that's what she told me. I can tell that my mother feels uneasy when she talks about it too, but I'm guessing my grandmother has told her already, and anyway, it's weird how small this world is, and how you just know people who know people, and I guess you just never know that somebody could be a serial killer. I want to start by saying that this isn't the first bad experience that I've had dog sitting, but it's definitely the worst. So, I started dog sitting back when I was 13, and I made some good money doing it. I'm currently 19, and this happened when I was 18. I set up an easy way for people to contact me about dog sitting. I put out posts on Facebook and Instagram about it often, and would sort of get people in my messages asking to dog sit and whatnot. And I got a notification from Instagram one day stating someone was trying to message me. I accepted it, and the message said that me and my wife are looking to find a dog sitter while we go away for a week in Florida. You'll have to do the work from the 4th to the 11th this month. We'll pay you $300 for the week. You're welcome to stay at our house or go back to your own home. I started talking back and forth with this man, and his name was Mr. Brown. So I agreed to take the gig and told him that I would stay at his house for the week. Once I got to his house, I was introduced to his 2 dogs, Mina and Letty. Mina was a little Yorkie and Letty was a blue hound. I was shown around his house, which was surrounded by 76 acres. I live in a farm town, and I live on 32 acres myself, so staying here didn't really freak me out or anything. The closest neighbors were pretty far away, and you would actually have to drive there if you wanted to talk to them, to be honest. They told me the rules and when to feed them and blah blah blah, and then Mrs. Brown told me about the nearest neighbour, and in her words she was a nice person, just a little drugged up and confused apparently. She mentioned how sometimes she would pull into their driveway instead of hers and would end up mistaking Mrs. Brown for her dead daughter. Hearing this made me feel pretty bad for her, to be honest, and I know all too well how hard it is for parents to lose their child because of how my parents were after losing my brother in a car accident. Mrs. Brown said that she shouldn't do anything bad, though, and if she came up to the house, just point her back home and she would leave with no problems. After they left, I was down to watch movies and just chill with the dogs, and the first 2 days were fine with no hiccups. The third day, however, Miss Rose did pull into the driveway. I came outside as she was getting out of the car, and she looked up to see me, and immediately she got back into her car and left. I thought that was weird, but I chalked it up to her realizing that it was the wrong house when she saw me and went back inside. Later that night, though, I got a call from Mrs. Brown asking if I was okay, and I said yeah, and I asked why, and she then went on to tell me about how she got a call from Miss Rose and that she said that there was a robber at her house. I explained what happened, and she just laughed and said that she must have been confused and forgot that they were out of town. I ended the phone call, making a note to go over there tomorrow to clear the air about me being a robber and all that. Once I went to bed that night, though, things got crazy. I woke up at around 2, hearing a sort of light scratching sound that almost sounded like, I don't know, ticking coming from outside the window. At first, I thought that it might have been a bird or some sort of, a creature, and I left it alone. But the noise kept me from falling asleep, and I wanted to scare it away, so I got up and went to open the blinds, but screamed when I lifted the blinds at the sight of Miss Rose trying to pry the window open with a pair of pliers. Once she saw me, though, she started banging on the window with the pliers. The dog started barking now, and I quickly got up, told the dogs to follow me, grabbed my phone and ran to a room with no windows, which was the bathroom, locking the door in case she got in. I called 911 and explained the situation quickly, giving them the address from what I could remember. She said that the police would be there in 10 minutes, which for the area was actually pretty good considering their house is pretty rural. I had gotten the dogs to be quiet and put them in the closet, connected to the bathroom, to make sure that she didn't hear them. I was trying to stay calm, and I could still hear the pounding on the window, though. As I continued to talk to the operator, I then heard the glass shatter. I cursed under my breath, trying not to cry. I was really scared and pretty much ready to cry from the fear of being beaten to death by someone who was clearly not in the right state of mind. I was whispering what was happening to the operator, hiding in the back of the bathroom in the tub, and after about 4 minutes of pretty much silence, I then heard footsteps, and I could see feet under the other side of the door, and I cursed to myself again. I then see Miss Rose get onto her hands looking under the crack, and I mistakenly let out a gasp. She gets up quickly, pounding at the door. I can tell that she's still using the pliers. I am at this point crying, asking the operator where the police are, to which she responds 3 minutes. And those 3 minutes, man, they felt like forever. I screamed at Miss Rose to please go away, and she screamed back that I shouldn't be here. Once I heard the sound of police cars, and about a minute later them trying to kick the door down, I felt a little bit better. I was told to stay on the line till the intruder was caught, and that police were not trying to get into the house. Eventually, they did get into the house, though, and I yelled to get their attention. Not that they needed it. She was still banging on the door at this point. Once they got into the room, she was told to drop her weapon, and she obeyed, saying that she didn't do anything wrong. They got her in cuffs, and a police officer told me that it was okay to unlock the door, to which I slowly got up and unlocked it. After being taken to the police station and giving them my story for their report, I went to my parents' house because I was just too scared to be alone at this point. The next day, I called Mrs. Brown and explained the situation. I got full payment even after telling them that I wasn't going back to the house. They called me a few days later saying that Miss Rose was under the influence of drugs apparently, and in her words, she told the police that she decided to take care of the robber, me, herself, and that she did nothing wrong. She was charged with breaking and entering, which is kind of ironic. But after that, I quit dog sitting for good, and am a lot more paranoid and always make sure that my doors and windows are locked these days. So, just a fair warning, I don't live in the best area, but it's close to my kids' school and it's really all that we can afford. Now, I was in line at a stoplight waiting for it to change so I could get to school to pick up my older kids. I had my toddler with me. While I was waiting, I heard my passenger side handle move like someone was trying to open it. I always lock my car doors out of habit. My car is older, so they don't lock automatically when I start the car like newer ones do. I look over and there's an older woman aggressively trying to open my door. My window is cracked a bit for fresh air, but not all the way down. She reached up trying to get the window to go down, but couldn't get her fingers in. The woman then says, "Excuse me, I need you to help me out. I need a ride." Now, I'm all for helping people, but not when they're trying to get into my car with no explanation like this. I mean, you just don't do that. I say, "Do you need me to call 911? She says, "No, you need to help me. Just let me in. Come on now, help me out." Pulls on the door again. Lucky for me, the light changed and I told her, "Sorry, but I have to go. I can't help you." I drove off and after that, thankfully, I haven't seen her since. It is unfortunately, though, the only way to get my kids to school, so I have to drive through that way about every day, and I just sure hope that I don't run into this woman ever again. So I have a friend, a 27-year-old male, who told me a fascinating story about lucid dreaming one day. He explained that his father had taught himself to lucid dream every night, a skill that I was highly envious of. His father apparently taught him how to do it when he was 15 or so, by drawing dots on his hands and looking at them throughout the day so that eventually when he was dreaming, he could look at his hand and not see the dots, allowing him to realize that he was dreaming. This is a common technique for inducing lucid dreams and something that I tried but never for long enough to actually stick to it. As a teenager, he learned to lucid dream on command, just like his father every night. He explained that it was more thrilling than any drug that he had ever taken because he had full control over every scenario and could construct any environment of his wildest imagination. He could have his way with any person that he imagined, obtain superpowers like flying, invisibility, teleport to any place that he wanted to, or visit alien worlds, etc. It was pure bliss, and he explained to me that he ended up sleeping all throughout the day at times because his dream world was more exciting than reality. He did this every night for more than a year or so until things started to get a bit strange. You see, he told me that he started to notice a hooded figure in the periphery of his vision, but whenever he tried to look at the figure, it would walk out of his field of vision. The figure first appeared very far away in the distance from him, but every night after the first sighting, the hooded figure would return to his dream, but closer to him and still always outside of his central view. He could never really focus on the figure or see its face, so he couldn't tell if it was supposed to be human or something else. Once the figure started appearing closer to him, though, he would be filled with an overwhelming sense of dread and felt less control over his dream environment. Eventually, too, he finally felt terrified to fall asleep knowing that the figure would get even closer and seemingly harm him, as he sensed the evil nature of this faceless figure. He ended up fighting sleep every night to prevent dreaming and turned into an insomniac, which he still is to this day. He told me that he doesn't lucid dream anymore, and I'm not sure how he unlearned it, but he hasn't seen the hooded figure since then. It's a pretty creepy story that really stuck with me, and a caveat to trying to learn to lucid dream every night. You might grow to regret it when things get out of control, like it did for my friend. I'm still in contact with this friend, so if any of you guys are interested in questions for me to ask him, then I'd be happy to. Just leave them in the comment section below and I'll see what I can do. So I'm guessing on the timing, but around 7 years ago, I would say, my older brother and several of his friends went on a camping trip in rural Maine. When they drove up there, they decided to stay in a random motel nearby the skiing trails. He said that it looked pretty run down and sketchy, but being college kids at the time, they didn't care too much and just wanted a cheap place to sleep for the night. After a nice day of skiing, they got some drinks at a local bar and headed back to the motel to get some rest. As they were all hanging out in their motel room, my brother opened a desk drawer to store some of his things in, and what he found inside the drawer made his jaw drop in horror. There was a coiled Ethernet cord with dried bloodstains all over it. And as if this discovery wasn't terrifying enough, about an hour later, all the lights turned off all of a sudden without any warning. My brother walked outside and saw that there wasn't a single light on in the entire motel. He went to the front desk and the guy working there explained that the power had went out. It was nighttime at this point, so everything was completely pitch black. My brother spent the rest of the night awake and scared, and the power didn't turn back on until the next morning. My brother took a photo of the bloody Ethernet cord, but sadly I just texted him asking him if he still had the photo, and he can't find it on his phone or iCloud. I really wish I could have shared that photo here because it really was quite disgusting to see. From the look of it, I could imagine that someone was brutally stabbed and strangled in that room that he was staying in, perhaps. I mean, there was a lot of blood. I also think that it was pretty stupid of him that he didn't call the police and at least fill out a report about any of this. I've never really had any experiences in my life besides this one, and I have a skeptical mind, but am very open to the idea of the paranormal. I guess you could say that I want to believe. However, I have no explanation regarding this incident. It happened to me and a couple of friends in 2011, and I've never really told anyone other than my significant other. We were 19 and in a ghost hunting phase, and had been to some reportedly haunted sites, and didn't have any experiences to speak of really. But we had heard of a small abandoned village or hamlet a short way out of the city that we were told was very creepy and unsettling. Side note too, my grandma, it turns out, was actually born there of all places. It was a very small town with maybe 50 to 100 people that had abandoned it, reportedly overnight in the 50s. But we decided to go there after dark one evening. All that remains there, apparently, is the collapsed general store, one house, and a perfectly preserved Ukrainian Orthodox church. The small house had the windows and the doors removed. We explored inside, and there was still wallpaper in the bedrooms and the living room, and some old kitchen items in the kitchen, too. It was creepy for sure, but mainly because it was dark in the middle of nowhere. We took some videos of the inside and left shortly afterward. When we got home, we watched the videos and we didn't see anything, but we picked up something that sounded like a girl saying, "Please no." It wasn't clear, so I didn't really think too much of it. But something compelled us to go back a few weeks later, and this is where everything got very real. So, I decided to print off some questions in Latin because I saw a YouTube video saying that an inhuman spirit would respond to Latin, which I was like, what the heck, but hey, I'll give it a go. It was mostly to creep out another friend that tagged along this time. I was trying to be funny, if I'm being honest. But the second that we drove up to the house, the feeling was just different this time. I felt dread is the only way to put it. The three of us, our one friend refused to get out of the car, decided to go back into the house and discovered that it actually had a dirt cellar this time, so we went down. It was your average dirt basement, really. Absolutely nothing in there except a few old broken jars, really. When we went back upstairs, one friend went back to the car, and I stood out on the porch leaning into the window, while my other friend stood on the grass maybe 10 feet behind me. And this is when I decided to start asking the questions in Latin while recording. I asked things like, is there anything there? Who or what are you? And lastly, show yourself. And it was at this point that there was a sound from inside the house. I said it again, and before I could even finish, 4 massively loud booms just came from nowhere. It sounded like something perhaps coming up from the basement, I would guess, and really fast. I screamed at this, loudly, as did the friend who was behind me, and at that we ran to the car, and my one friend who was already in the driver's seat, we barely got into the car before she was peeling down the dirt road. I cried a little bit that night, and I don't think that there was a word spoken by anyone after that. Now, there was no way that it was an animal or a person inside the house. It was tiny and nowhere really for an animal or a person of that size to hide. Plus, we had just been through the entire house ourselves and we for sure would have seen something that big. But there was nothing on the video other than me screaming and telling my friend to go when I got in the car. I have no clue what happened that night, but it scared me to my core, although I must admit that it did make me curious too. I've been to other allegedly haunted places since then, but have never had another experience or encounter like this. I haven't been back there since then, and to be honest, I don't really intend to return either. I've been a long-time listener, and I thought that it would be a perfect time to tell my story, and I would love to hear what you guys might think and what your theories might be. So it was about 8:30 p.m. While taking out the trash at work with a co-worker or roommate, a large dog approached us at some point. But the strangest thing is that it seemed to be like, I don't know, galloping almost. It wasn't walking normally like an animal should. Despite the many surrounding lights, the dog appeared to be entirely black as well. It was sort of silhouetted just enough that you could see its muscle definition, but not much more. I could also see a slight reflection in its eyes, and it seemed to lack a shadow as well, I think. My roommate and I, upon noticing this, both expressed having different experiences and visions of the dog though. When I initially saw the dog, I interacted saying, "Oh, a dog," in excitement. For me, I proceeded to sit entirely still on the cement, staring like a statue. What I saw was a large, fluffy black dog, lazy ears, similar to a Newfoundland dog. My roommate expresses seeing the dog as a large, very muscular, aggressive-looking black dog that stood rigid the entire time, staring like it wanted to attack us. It was sort of haired, muscled, and had pointed ears. I jokingly stated that the dog looked like a skinwalker, not really anticipating that anything would happen. But then we immediately felt a wave of dread fall over us. Something was wrong. We both saw the dog's jaw open, almost as if it was about to bark at us, and then we heard a distant, yet extremely clear, high-pitched, "Come here." The dog immediately turned to take off. We turned around the corner. The creature was unreasonably far up the road for the short amount of time that it was not being observed. It was wobbling too, crossing its paws, walking oddly. When it turned left around the corner, it seemed to nearly stand up on its hind paws as well, like on two legs, just before passing around and out of sight. The rest of the night too was just as interesting. We had trouble with certain objects slightly moving place, nudging a bit, settling again. It quickly became more aggressive as well, but then, just as we were about to leave, we heard a loud and persistent knocking coming from the front of the store. We had a brief look, but we quickly went to our cars upon hearing it. It was such a weird night that we just thought that we should get out of there. On the drive home, I tried to blast music and ignore what I had just seen, but I heard a whispering coming from my back seat. I couldn't quite make out any of the words, but it just sounded like whistling almost. But get this, I saw a random antique clawfoot bathtub on the left side of the road in a field, and it was definitely not there the day before, or even that morning on my drive there. And the kicker is that I was watching the sidelines of the roads for the animals, and I most certainly saw a buck. He was leading out in front of the road, a good 50 feet ahead. I slammed on my brakes, but when I got closer, it was merely a bush. I have a hard time explaining any of this, and perhaps I was just paranoid, but everything that happened that night was really weird, strange, and I don't know how to explain any of it. So last night, me and my friend decided that we wanted to go into the woods to get a little scared, so we brought some flashlights and a knife and went down to a creek in our woods for Halloween. To get the best experience, we turned the flashlights off and stood there. Both of us had an overwhelming feeling that we were being watched, so we got out of the woods. Later that night, we were hanging out on a small street near our houses, and we wanted to get scared again, so we went to a dark corner of the road where it gets a little bit suspicious with the houses there and the woods and whatnot. We both felt the same feeling from earlier, though, that we were being watched, so we looked down into the woods about 50 yards away and noticed a certain part of the woods was pitch black while you could make out the rest of the woods. The feeling started to get more ominous, and we started to feel surrounded and heard walking in the woods and leaves and stuff being crunched and twigs breaking. The silence was deafening as well, and without even speaking to each other, we both had an overwhelming feeling of dread, and we sprinted back up the street. But while I was sprinting, I turned to look back, and for a split second I saw a girl in a white gown in the dark spot that I had mentioned earlier. She didn't have a body though, and the only thing that I could make out as a body, I guess you could say, was that she sort of looked like a grey aura outlining the body. What I do remember, though, are her incredibly black eyes. We ran back to my house and couldn't even describe what we were feeling, but I know that I'm staying out of the woods for a while after that. I won't be going back for quite some time. This is actually my stepmom's best friend's story. I do have my own, but I'm very hesitant to drag some of them up. I'm hoping that telling somebody else's will open me up to a little more. Anyway, my stepmom didn't like us much, but she told my sister, 3 years older, and I this experience growing up to scare us out of being stupid, I guess. It was my family's stranger danger story, I guess you could say. My stepmom, her name's Macy, grew up as a kind of a privileged teen in the 70s, and her mum had moved their family over here, the States, from England when she was about 9. She went to a pretty nice high school in a really nice town. There, she made friends with a girl, Lily, who didn't exactly run with Macy's type of crowd. Popular, stereotypical, etc. But they really hit it off, and Lily would take Macy out to do her type of stuff like hiking, fishing, sailing. There's even a hilarious set of pictures of them camping. My stepmom has raccoon eyes and looks like she hates everything. Anyway, because of Lily's influence, the two of them would do stuff like that a good amount. And one Sunday, they decided to go hike in some hills about maybe an hour away. Macy put on what I'm sure were her extremely expensive hiking shoes, and the two of them drove off to the hiking trails. Lily parked in this big clearing with makeshift parking spots. You know the thing, like a piece of wood marking the head of a space. But there were no other cars there, and this was only important in hindsight, I guess. So they started hiking up the hill, off the path, because Lily fancied herself as something of a rebel. The hike was nothing extraordinary. If you asked my stepmom, she would just lament for 15 minutes how sticky and buggy it was. They reached the top of the hill, and my stepmom was done. The polished and pampered side of her was coming out, and she groaned until Lily begrudgingly said okay. They would rest and then walk down again, slower. They'd been heading down the hill for maybe 10 minutes when Macy started whinging again. Lily conceded to walking down the side of the road instead of the rough hiking trail. So there they are, probably looking like a couple of tools geared up for hiking and walking down a terrible road, and after not even 5 minutes, a truck pulled up next to them. It was red and rusty and just generally looked like an old clunker. The guy driving rolled down the window and the girls looked in through the passenger side window. He had a big beard, a baseball cap pulled down, and long brown hair. He greeted them and even smiled through his beard, asking if they needed a ride. Macy described him as charming and even cute. Lily still says the moment that he greeted them, her heckles went up. Despite her better judgment, though, my stepmom convinced her to get into the truck. It must only be a 10-minute drive down to the car tops, she said. The two girls opened the passenger's door to this rusty old thing, and the guy directed them behind the seat to get into the back. They settled in and the truck started rumbling forwards. Lily always says that this was the point that it hit her what a huge mistake they had just made. The back seat was clean enough, but there was a rope on the floor behind the driver's seat and 4 boxes of saran wrap half hanging out from under the passenger seat. It seemed creepy and weird, but Lily didn't want to freak my stepmom out, so she just kept her mouth shut. After 10 minutes, the woods didn't look any clearer, and they hadn't seen another car the whole time. Lily asked how long he thought that it would be, and he said that he was taking a different route down the hill and had to stop somewhere to get something first. That was it too. The girls were 16, 17, and Lily didn't want to press the issue. She was scared. She can remember his hair because she was sitting behind him. He looked like a woodsy guy, but his hair was super tangled and dirty. She noticed crusted mud on his collar and tried to find something identifiable about him, but just got scared the more that she picked up on all the little details. He was youngish though, strong-looking, and had about a foot on both of them. They didn't ask any more questions, and he didn't offer any more information, and they drove on. Several minutes after that, they reached a tiny shack or a log cabin-looking place, right there in the clearing of the trees too. There was an old stump there, someone had been chopping wood, and a huge axe stuck into the log. Lily was definitely on red alert now. The guy turned off the truck and slipped out of it, saying, "I'll be right back, don't get out," and he disappeared into the house. Lily, she tried to talk to my stepmom about how she was incredibly uncomfortable, but she mostly just dismissed it. Lily started begging, increasingly freaked out, and finally put her foot down, demanding Macy exit the truck with her right now. So they got out and walked around the front of the vehicle. The house was about 50 yards in front of them. Why this guy would have left 2 young girls in the truck alone while going into the house is beyond me, and they wandered around, looking at it hesitantly. If this guy really was decent and just trying to give them a ride, it would be super rude to just run off, right? My stepmom had this strict upbringing when it comes to manners and public persona, and she saw it as an issue of that nature. So she actually started to head back to the truck, opening the front door to climb in behind the driver's seat, and Lily was ticked off and followed her to yell some more. On the driver's side floor, half hidden under the seat though, there was a big hatchet there, and it had dried red-brown stains covering the blade and stuck to the floor under it. Lily understandably lost it at seeing this. My stepmom started getting hysterical too, and so they decided that leaving was by far their best option at this point, and just booked it off the side of the property into the trees. They bumbled around in the trees for a little while, until Lily was fairly confident that they were on their way back down the hill. My stepmom cried all the way down. Lily did feel bad about it, but was also completely freaked out that he would hear it, and kept trying to calm her down. When they finally got back down to the bottom, and saw the old wooden fence that surrounded the original parking area, they were relieved. But as they got closer, they saw it. There was the truck. It was parked on the other side of the gravelly makeshift lot, and it was just sitting there, facing the other way, innocently. They couldn't see if anyone was in it, and of course, Macy wanted to run for the car, but Lily was super hesitant. She managed to calm my stepmom down, saying that she wanted to wait a bit before running out into the open to see what was out there. Remember, this is in the 70s too, so there's no cell phones. In fact, there was no ranger station or anyone around. The parking lot was big and empty and open, and who knows what would have happened if they decided to stroll across it. Thankfully, Lily convinced my stepmom to chill, and the two of them sort of hunkered down against a big tree for a bit, hidden by bushes and other trees, and waited it out for what seemed to be a couple of hours. Then, dark started to fall. All the animals started coming out at this point and making noises, and my stepmom, predictably, started getting antsy about this and bothering Lily, who was tired and moments away from giving in. She was just planning their dash to the car when they heard a clunk. Across the twilight-lit lot, they watched as one of the back doors of their car swung open, and the bearded guy slid his way out of the back seat. He got out, shut the door, looked around at the surrounding woods for several moments, and then walked back to his truck. The truck lumbered past their car and out of sight. Several minutes after watching him drive away, they sprinted to their car as fast as they could, jumped in, and they peeled out before they had even shut the doors. If this guy is still alive, then he's really old, but still, be careful out there, guys, and don't make the same mistake that they did. So this happened several years ago. I was home alone one evening when I heard a knock at the back door, and this really confused me, as no one ever used that door. My husband and I lived in a fourplex at the time, and all of the units had a back door at the top of a narrow staircase. These doors were a little bit inconvenient to access, as you'd have to go around the building and up the narrow stairs as opposed to the wider main entrance at the front. So it just didn't make any sense to use the back entrance, and I couldn't think of anyone who would go to that door to visit. Anyway, as I approached the back door, I saw two tall men in the window standing at the door, and a chill instantly went down my spine. I didn't feel safe opening the door, so I called out hello. One of the men, they tapped on the window. Yeah, hello, may we come in? We're with Bresnan. At the time, my husband and I had Bresnan for cable, but didn't have any issues with it. I replied, we're not having any issues. Is there a problem? Ma'am, the man said, can we come in? We're servicing the area, and it's important that we look at your cable. I shook my head. But we're not having any issues, I repeated, so there's no need to stop by. Ma'am, we're visiting every resident. Let us in so that we can do our job. I noticed the man grab the doorknob and try to open the locked door at this point. I slowly grabbed a knife from our knife block and held it at my chest. We're not having any issues, I repeated, trying not to convey shakiness of my voice. So you don't need to be in here. The two figures appeared to shuffle and then sort of straighten. Ma'am, let us in. We're on a deadline and we need to do our job. I glanced at the clock, gauging when my husband would arrive home from work, and I gripped the knife tighter. Ma'am? Ma'am? I saw him try the doorknob again. I closed my eyes and felt overwhelming gratitude of always locking my doors. And just then, a thought came to the forefront of my mind. I'm sorry, I can't help you, but could I please get your names and badge numbers? I can give your supervisor a call to let them know that our cable is fine. I heard another shuffle, and one of the men replied, No need to, ma'am. We're sorry that we wasted your time. With that, both of the men exited the staircase and disappeared into the night. Shaken up, I held the knife tight and tried to get my bearings. I remember making a mental note to call the cable company or the police, but my hands were shaking so badly I couldn't even hold my phone. With the knife still grasped to my chest and the phone falling out of the other hand, I sank to the floor and cried. When my husband returned home, I told him what had happened. I was still very shaken up and started crying again after he came home, and he immediately called the Bresnan Cable Company and spoke to a representative, who informed us that no one from their company was out on an assignment in our area. The next day, we asked our neighbors if they had a visit from the company, but nobody had. So I'm a male, 31, and I purchased a home roughly 2 years ago, after living in an apartment that was located right behind a cemetery. I have videos on my profile that show two of my many things that happened there. But here at the house, seems like we were either followed or what was already there just kept doing its thing. Me included, my 3 children, female 12, female 10, and male 5. I'm a single father. This thing does not bother them, only me for whatever reason, but it all started out about 3 days after we moved in. I was in the kitchen, and you can sort of see the hallway that leads to the kids' room from there. I saw what looked like one of my kids run down the hall and into one of the rooms. Right after that, all 3 of my actual kids came running in from the front door from playing outside. I just thought, okay, whoa, that was weird. But after that, I would sleep in my room on the opposite side of the house from my kids' rooms, and I would feel like one of them was coming in and laying on the bed. I would look over to ask if they were okay, and when I did, nobody was ever there. On one particular night, the same thing happened, only this time I felt a kid's arm lay across my back. I rolled over, and what looked like a girl smaller than my daughter's jumped out of the bed and went into the bathroom. When this thing moved, it moved too. It was like lightning almost. It went around 12 feet in a matter of roughly a second. Since then, it doesn't fail that at least 2 times a week, something paranormal happens here. You can hear a door in the house close when I'm at home and the kids are at school, the occasional voice of a man or a woman having a conversation somewhere in the house, and of course the bed incidences. In fact, it got to the point where I had 3 paranormal investigators come and we all saw the girl run behind the kitchen island. And I guess it's not the scary things going on, it's more that I feel uncomfortable sleeping in my own room, so I just lay on the couch with the TV these days and a few lights on. At the corner of my eye, I could still see something darting in the hallways, but man, it's better than something climbing into your bed at like midnight, 3 or 4 times in the week. So I can't really say that I believe in ghosts or the paranormal, but I did have this experience a while back that I just cannot understand. Ever since I was little, it would take me a long time to go to sleep. I'm talking like laying in bed for 3 hours before actually falling asleep. And this one night, a few years ago, I remember getting very annoyed because I just couldn't sleep. I'd been laying there in bed for at least 4 hours already. It was around 1 in the morning and I had to wake up at 6 for school, so I was really trying to fall asleep. At the time, for some reason, I was terrified to sleep in pure darkness, so I had an antique lamp on during all the hours of the night. I was well past the age where a nightlight was acceptable to have, but hey, it was my thing. I was finally drifting to sleep too when I then just heard a loud slam. I slowly opened my eyes, still very drowsy, being seconds away from peacefully sleeping. When clear as day, I watched my bedroom door, which was formerly closed, swing open and then slam again. I watched as my door opened and slammed shut faster and faster, and there was nothing I could really do besides just watch it. My lamp was on and illuminating the door, so I was able to see that nobody was grabbing the doorknob or anything. After at least 2 minutes of me watching my door rapidly open and close, I got kind of fed up by it, and I wasn't scared at all, which is odd, I know, but I just ended up mumbling, "Can you, stop?" The door slammed one final time, and that was it. I rolled over towards the wall, my back to the door, and I fell asleep. In the morning, I checked my wall, and I saw a hole that the doorknob left when it slammed into it, so it definitely wasn't a dream. And like I said, I'm still not sure what to think about all of it, but nothing like that has happened since then, and yeah, it was really strange.